Arnold was a strange child. Not the normal strange, he was too odd even for that. As a baby, he never cried and he never fussed. He didn't indicate at all that he wanted to be fed, or showed that he ever wanted anything. His parents had been worried about his lack of reaction when he turned 3 and brought him to a specialist, who examined him with every kind of test they had. Luckily, most of those tests were experimental and the parents weren't charged for their use. Unfortunately, nothing was found. His brain worked fine and his central nervous system lit up when he was touched or prodded. His eyes and physical reactions were all within the normal range for a child of his age. The only conclusion that the specialist could come to, that the only thing that seemed to be wrong with him, was his lack of being stimulated mentally. Nothing seemed to excite him. Shiny toys and loud noises did absolutely nothing for the boy. Different tasting foods made no impact on him and they could feed him anything at all and he would eat it all the same way. Monotonously. When Arnold was 5, his father found him with an odd furry thing in his grasp. Not knowing what it was, he tried to take it and see what it was. Arnold squinted his eyes at him and reluctantly let it go. His father looked at the thing and it was a squirrel. A dead squirrel. Scared, the father quickly disposed of the carcass and took Arnold inside the house. He would be starting school in a few weeks and his father didn't want Arnold to make any kind of fuss. "Don't tell your mother you found that dead squirrel," his father warned him. "I don't want her upset." Arnold looked at him with a blank stare, as was his normal look, and walked away without a word. His blonde hair was trimmed short at the whim of his mother and it gave the boy an air of maturity. School started and Arnold was admitted to the local primary school. Both of his parents were worried about his interactions with the other children, so they stayed around and watched as Arnold entered the classroom for the first time. None of the other children paid him any attention and he sat at the very back of the classroom. The other children were rambunctious and lively as they jumped around and played with each other, while Arnold sat in his seat and kept to himself. Dejected, his parents left and hoped that the constant company of other kids would do their non-reactive son a world of good. The teacher had been advised about Arnold's peculiarities and she was determined to break that little boy out of his shell. She didn't realize that it wasn't a shell, it was just who he was. She still did her best to include him at the front of any activities that she had the students participate in. She worked hard and spent extra time with him to try and get some kind of reaction out of him, and all of her efforts were in vain, until that fateful day the class project was introduced. Keeping a pet. For the first time in 6 months, she saw Arnold's eyes widen slightly and almost sparkle. Her heart was overjoyed that he was finally interested in something, so she dove into the subject with abandon and explained everything she knew about keeping a pet alive and happy. Arnold listened attentively, or so she assumed, because his eyes never left the little hamster in the large cage. A week later, she came into the classroom early to prep like she always did, and she noticed that the hamster's cage was open and the little thing was gone. She frantically searched all of the classroom's nooks and crannies and all the hiding spots a hamster could get into, and she didn't find it. Saddened at the loss of the class pet, she closed the cage and decided to hide it for the day. When her students came in, only 2 of them noticed the missing cage and asked her about it. "Nibbles is just taking a short vacation," the teacher said, surprised that Arnold was not one of them. "He'll be back in a few days." Arnold looked up from his desk and looked right at her, and let a little smile show. The teacher caught her breath at the sight, because she had never seen his mouth move except to eat, and now she could see his smile. It was striking, and she made special note of it in her class log. She was thankful that hamsters were so cheap and would pick up a couple of them, just in case. She had heard that the little things always managed to get out of their cages somehow. Every few weeks, she would find their pet hamster missing and would replace it, and no one was the wiser. She would laugh as she added "escaped hamsters" to her classroom expense report and claim the loss. She was a little worried that the things might get together and create a bit of a problem, but they never did. Once they escaped from the cage, they were never seen again. The janitor told her that he couldn't find any droppings, so they hadn't stuck around. The school year ended, and as each student came to her to accept their certificate of completion, graduating them into the next grade, they each gave her a hug. She always accepted them as her due for watching over them all year. The last child to approach her was Arnold. She opened her arms to get his hug and he stepped close. She hugged him, a little tighter than she had the other children, because he was the one that had made the most progress in her class that year. Arnold put his mouth by her ear and whispered, "Thank you." The teacher caught her breath and tensed up, because he hadn't spoken a single word the whole year. "You are the best student I ever had." She whispered back and let him out of the hug. When he stepped back, once again she was stunned by him as he gave her a full smile this time. She held in her tears and her emotions just long enough for the ceremony to end. She closed the classroom door and burst into tears, because none of the children had ever thanked her on their own before. They had been prodded by their parents to say it and they never meant it. This time, when the silent Arnold spoke the words, she knew he was genuinely thanking her. Arnold's father drove home from the school, which officially started summer break. He briefly turned his head towards the back seat. "So, did you learn a lot this year?" Arnold nodded slightly and his father saw it in the rear view mirror. "Want to tell us about it?" Arnold's mother asked. Arnold shook his head slightly. Everything he had learned he wanted to keep to himself. A month into summer vacation, Arnold's father discovered a bit of an off smell came from under the small shed that he kept his lawnmower and various tools. He was sure that something had crawled under there and died, so he grabbed a shovel and dug at the ground beside the shed. It was looser than he thought it should have been, then he heard a squelch sound and the smell tripled in intensity. He gagged a little and held his breath as he dug the shovel back and down, then pulled it out. And found 6 dead hamsters in various states of disembowelment. He threw up, because he couldn't be sure that the shovel did all of that damage, even with the sound the shovel had made and the increased smell. He walked back to the house and grabbed a black garbage bag, dumped the ghastly remains into it, then used the shovel to dig out anything that might still be under the shed. He was relieved that there were just entrails and no other dead animals. He added them to the bag and filled the space he just dug, then carried the garbage bag to the back of his property. A hole was dug, the bag was tossed in, then it was buried. With the horrible task done, Arnold's father thought about confronting his son. He wasn't sure how to phrase it, though. Should he accuse him outright? The boy was only 5 years old and would be 6 in a few days. No, that was too harsh. Maybe he could bring it up in conversation somehow. He chuckled and shook his head. There was no real way to do it. I'll just have to keep an eye on him and see what else he does. Arnold's father thought, put the shovel back in the shed, and went into the house. He didn't notice the bright-eyed boy that had been hiding right there in the bushes the entire time. Starting junior high school was quite an experience for a 13-year-old Arnold. Not because of the other students or the half-caring teachers. No. It was because he got to see so much more of the things he liked. With so many people around, his little indiscretions went completely unnoticed and he liked that. He liked it a lot. You would normally think that with more people around that it would be more dangerous for exposure, but, the truth was, with so many people around it provided a very valuable resource. Anonymity. He was quite happy when he found out that their new biology teacher used to teach high school. It was the perfect cover for him, because he hoped beyond hope that she would give them things they shouldn't experience for another couple of years. When she introduced dissecting a frog, his guess had been correct and Arnold had to stop himself from going to the front of the class to hug the woman. He hadn't had anyone help feed his desire like this since primary school. Unlike everyone else in the class, who were completely disgusted at the display, Arnold was fascinated. He had discovered a long time ago that little creatures had lots of little things inside them to play with. He never imagined it was an actual science. There were even wonderful tools that could be used as well. Arnold held in his shiver at the thought of stealing the set of dissection tools. If he had them, then he wouldn't have to rely on the old kitchen steak knife he had been using since he was a kid. Now, don't be shy. The woman said as her gaze took in all of the disgusted faces and she felt a hint of satisfaction. Come up to the desk for a closer. She stopped talking when a blonde buzzcut boy practically appeared beside her. Can I touch it? Arnold asked her and pointed to the heart of the frog. Not with bare hands. She replied and pointed to a box of rubber gloves. You could catch a disease or become very sick if you handled them without protection. Arnold shrugged. He had been touching them on the inside for years and hadn't gotten sick yet. She helped him put on the gloves and then she started to ask him questions about the organs they could see. He answered what he could. He didn't have much knowledge past the basics. Heart, lungs, stomach, intestines, and kidneys. She was impressed that someone so young knew so much about anatomy. When she started to expand his knowledge and pointed out the other organs he had missed, she saw the excitement on his face and he sucked up the information like a sponge. What's your name? The teacher asked. Arnold. Arnold responded without looking up from the frog's innards. I think you and I are going to get along very well this year. She said with a smile. Arnold smiled back, because she had let him touch her bright silver tools. If she let him play with them some more, he had to agree. They were going to get along very, very well. Biology became his favorite class, even when the teacher gave them lots of things to write down. When she warned them that they needed this knowledge to continue in the field, he dove into it with reckless abandon. He passed every exam with perfect marks and every time she brought out a new specimen to dissect, he didn't have to be asked to approach. He was by her side, had rubber gloves expertly applied, and stood ready to help as much as he could. She was surprised that his interest never waned and he was always eager to learn anything she wanted to teach him. She had never met anyone like him before, and it touched her heart that she had instilled in him the same passion that she had for the subject. By the end of the year when she sat down to calculate her students' marks, she had saved his for last. She went over everything he did, and she wasn't surprised that he had achieved perfect marks in her course. If she added in the extra credit assignments that normal students used to keep their marks up, he had actually made 130% in her course. She had to take several breaths when she realized the sheer amount of work he had done for her. On grading day, each of the students had the opportunity to visit their classrooms and their teachers one last time. It was usually to return the subject book that those teachers taught, probably because they were too damaged to pass in before their report cards were given out. The biology teacher sat there all alone, knowing that every other book had been returned except one. She sighed at the sad state of them all and she would need to replace a dozen of them, at least. She heard a knock on her door and looked up to see that blonde buzzcut that she had come to adore. Arnold. She said, almost in a whisper. Arnold walked over to her and passed her the biology book he had used all year. It was in pristine condition and didn't look like it had ever been opened. What? Arnold. It's a great book and I took extra special care of it. Arnold said, then his eyes fell on the stacks of defaced books and he frowned. The teacher stood up and put his book down on the middle of her desk to keep it separate. Arnold. Arnold looked at her and the frown disappeared. I'm sorry they can't see how important the book is. She looked at the open door and walked over to it, closed and locked it, then came back over to him. I have something for you. She said and opened her top drawer. She took out a flat wooden box. Arnold's eyes widened when she opened it and it was a set of those wonderful tools. You are the best student I have ever had. She said. You deserve a reward for that. Arnold took the box and set it on the desk, then he stepped close to her and gave her a hug. The teacher's breath sped up at the strength in his embrace, hesitated for only another moment, then she put her arms around him and hugged him back. Thank you. Arnold said. She shivered at the deep sincerity in his voice. You're welcome. Arnold let her out of the hug and she let him go as well. After a moment, he said something that surprised her. "I wanted to hug you that first day when you brought out the frog," Arnold said, then he turned around and walked towards the door. "Arnold," the teacher said, and he turned back to face her. "I'm being transferred, again, to another middle school across the state," she said. "I won't see you here in the next school year." "That always happens," Arnold said as his face fell back into impassivity. "I meet a wonderful teacher, that gives me access to all this great knowledge, and then I never see them again." The teacher thought about what to do, then she reached into her pocket and wrote something on a business card. She walked over to him and held the card out to him. "When you graduate high school, you are still going to have lots of questions," she said. "I want you to call me and I'll answer anything you want to know." Arnold took the card and read the name and number, then put it in his pocket. "You'll really teach me, even though I won't be in school?" "Arnold," the teacher said and rubbed the top of his blonde buzz cut. "I have so much I want to teach you that you have to wait until then to learn it." Arnold let a smile appear on his face, showing teeth and all, and she shivered at the intensity. She unlocked the door and watched the young man leave, then she watched him walk down the hallway. If she didn't know any better, she could swear he had a bit of a swagger in his walk. The thought made her smile and she went back inside the classroom to clean everything up. When she had everything sorted and put away, she picked up the pristine book Arnold had returned to her, grabbed her purse and left the room. She shut the door of her classroom for the last time, then she smiled as she walked down the hallway and put a bit more sway into her own walk. High school was an ordeal for 16-year-old Arnold as well, only for much different reasons. His anonymity theory was completely blown out of the water and he wasn't sure why. Thankfully, it didn't take him long to figure it out. Unlike in both primary and middle school, the students in high school did not completely ignore him, nor did the teachers. He couldn't understand why, though. As far as he knew, he wasn't any different. He still acted the same way, indifferent to everything around him. What Arnold didn't realize was that in the eyes of his peers, he was particularly handsome. His blonde buzz cut and his height of 5'10", along with his slightly muscular build, attracted a lot of attention from the girls. He had attention from some of the boys as well, only for different reasons. Some of them hated him on sight, just because the girls they liked were looking at him and not them. Others saw a nice and easy target to pester. They loved razzying the new kids. The teachers on the other hand, had heard about his academic achievements and wanted to keep an eye on the rising intelligence and wanted to see what he would become when he gained their knowledge. No one would tell Arnold why he was so interesting, so he floated through his classes and did his work, depressed that his work was delayed and would be for as long as he couldn't get rid of all the unwanted attention. Because of his previous outstanding work in biology, Arnold had been advanced past the high school refresher course and put right into the university prep class. At first he was upset that he was going to miss something important by skipping what he thought was an important step in his education, until the third month of the year when the teacher announced that they were now ready to upgrade from small animals to pigs. Arnold had to fight his instincts to go to the front of the class and hug the man. Not because he would be rejected if he tried, and he would be, but it was because anything he did would be witnessed by pretty much the whole class. It would have to wait until another time. He absorbed all of the information the teacher gave him, and when he heard that pig tissue was used as grafts and implants for heart valves in people, his desire rose and almost burst from his mouth in a shout. Luckily, Arnold had caught himself before he gave himself away like that. His reaction hadn't gone unnoticed, however. One girl had stared at him the entire time she had been in the class and paid the teacher no attention at all. She had seen him tense up at the news and let herself hear what the teacher had said. He must want to be a surgeon. The girl thought, and then she smiled. I think I need a new study buddy this year. She looked at her friend that sat beside her, who was just as attentive in class as Arnold was, and whom she had relied on for studying in middle school and now high school. Maybe the three of us could work together. Plans formed in her head about how she could manipulate the smart and handsome boy and get him into her clutches. She smiled again as she decided the best way to give herself a head start. Her mother had told her that the best way to a man's heart was through his stomach, so she would ambush the unsuspecting boy at lunch the next day, with her friend's help. When the class ended, every teenager bolted for the door, even the girl and her friend. Arnold let everyone pass and then approached the teacher's desk. "Excuse me." The man looked up from his desk and then smiled. "Ah, Arnold. What can I do for you? When is the first scheduled dissection?" Arnold asked and tried to hide his enthusiasm. The teacher noticed anyway and chuckled. "I heard you were eager for more practical experience." Arnold couldn't lie and say he wasn't. "I enjoy the work so much, sir," he admitted instead. "Good," the man said to Arnold's surprise. "I've had glowing reviews from several sources about you, with some of them permanent parts of your academic record," he said. "Your professionalism in handling these tasks at such a young age is remarkable." Arnold wasn't sure how to respond to that, so he stayed quiet. "I normally dissect the specimen in a private lab and then bring it to class, mainly because some of these children." The man gave Arnold a depreciating smile. "Can't stomach seeing me work." Arnold knew he had to do something in response, so he nodded. "If you're okay with skipping lunch tomorrow, meet me in the lab. We can work on the beast together." "Sir," Arnold said and came to attention. "My mother packs my lunch." The teacher laughed and stood up. "Very good, young man," he said and clapped the boy on the shoulder. "I'll see you tomorrow." Arnold was bolstered at the thought of getting to work on something so big, so he left the classroom at a fast walk and was happier than he had been in a while. It was time for him to use his tools again and he couldn't wait. He had a smile on his face for the rest of the day, which passed by before he knew it, and he went home with a smile still on his face. When his mother saw his face, she walked over to him and gave him a hug. "Did the biology teacher give you good news today?" Arnold's mouth dropped open and he stared at her. "Mom." "What? How?" His mother chuckled. "They wouldn't put you into a university prep course without giving your parents the itinerary." "You knew?" Arnold asked. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I wanted to see this smiling and happy face, that's why." His mother said and bent his head as she kissed his forehead, because he was as tall as her now. "If you knew months ago it was coming, you would have been pestering everyone in the school to get the teacher to hurry up." Arnold opened his mouth to argue and then sighed. "I'm too eager. Having a passion is good. Letting it rule your every action is not." His mother warned him. "If you forget everything in pursuit of it, then it's not a passion anymore. It becomes an obsession and it will destroy you." Arnold nodded and she gave him another hug and a kiss on the cheek. "I won't need lunch tomorrow. I'll put extra snacks in your pockets for you," she said and let him go. The next day couldn't go fast enough for Arnold. He took his mother's advice to heart, though. He didn't ignore everything and paid attention when he was supposed to, answered verbal questions when asked, and then the lunch bell rang. Unlike every other time that class ended, Arnold was up and out of the room before everyone else. Everyone was stunned, because they had never seen him move that fast. Where is he going in such a hurry? The girl who had planned to trap him asked herself. Arnold arrived at the lab and no one was there. He didn't panic, though. He knew he had rushed to get here, so that he wouldn't be delayed by the other students in the hallway. He had to assume that was why the biology teacher wasn't there yet. A minute later, the teacher in question stepped into the lab and saw Arnold. "Did you fly here?" The man joked and waved Arnold to follow. He walked over to a door at the back of the room and Arnold followed him in, who gasped when he saw what was inside. Shelves and shelves of dissected animals of all shapes and sizes adorned the shelves. Some were sealed in wax on wooden plaques and some were in large specimen jars, with their organs splayed out in arrays. "Sir," Arnold managed to say. "Wonderful, isn't it?" the teacher asked. "It's taken me decades to gather them all." Arnold couldn't say anything as his eyes flowed around the room, his mouth agape. The teacher chuckled. "I could stand here all day and enjoy the delight I see on your face, but we have work to do." Almost like a switch had been flipped in his brain, Arnold took a breath and pushed his awe aside, then came over to the table in the middle of the room. The teacher had been impressed at the boy's compartmentalization. Just like him, when it was necessary, he could push all other concerns aside and would work. Enjoying things was secondary and could be done later. Arnold pulled a small wooden box out of his backpack and set it down, took out a sanitized cloth and laid it out, then opened the box and placed the bright and shiny silver tools out in the order they would be used. Once again, the teacher was impressed. The meticulousness, motions and respect that Arnold showed the tools of the trade, confirmed the recommendations he had received and the rumors he had heard. He prepped his own tools, just as meticulously as Arnold, then the two of them got to work. Under the teacher's direction, they opened up the specimen and carefully dissected it. When they had all the parts removed, the teacher handed Arnold the laminated name tags. "You can have the honors," the teacher said. Arnold nodded and in reverse order, attached the name tags to the underside of each organ, and placed each one back inside the specimen. The only way to find the name was to take out the organ. With it reassembled, the teacher laid the skin flaps closed and tacked them to hold them in place. They cleaned their tools and put them away, took off their gloves, and washed up in the sink. "That was very good work, Arnold," the teacher said. "Thank you for the help." "It was my pleasure, sir," Arnold said with a smile on his face. The teacher looked at his watch. "We have 20 minutes left until the class starts. Can I stay here and look at your work, sir?" Arnold asked, clearly excited. The teacher chuckled. "I suppose, if you let me show you the best specimen I have." Arnold nodded and the teacher walked across the room and opened a cabinet. He brought out a large wooden box and put it on the table. "Most people don't appreciate this when I show it to them," the teacher said. "Most people are ignorant, sir," Arnold said automatically, then he looked at his teacher with wide eyes. He hadn't meant to say that out loud. "Ha ha." The teacher laughed. "Well said. Well said." Then he lifted off the wooden cover. Arnold gasped at the sight. Inside the specimen case was the largest spider he had ever seen. That wasn't the best part, though. Each and every part of it, both inside and out, was suspended by some method and made it look like the spider had exploded. "It took me almost 2 months to make this display," the teacher said and then chuckled. "Removing the little eyes without damaging them or the retinal cords was a pain in the ass, let me tell you. It's..." Arnold wasn't sure how to put into words what seeing such intimate and intricate detailed work meant to him. "I can't describe it. People usually just make a sour face, say it's disgusting, then ignore it," the teacher said. "I knew you would see it for what it truly is. A work of art," Arnold said when he finally found the words he needed. The teacher smiled. "Yes, my boy. That's it exactly," he said. "I've got some work to prep for the class, so look around as much as you want until the bell rings." He walked to the door, not worried about leaving his prized possession out like it was. "When it does, get out here with the rest of the class, even though we both know you don't need to attend." "Yes, sir," Arnold said. He knew all about keeping up appearances. Thanks to that event, Arnold was free to enter the rear lab during lunchtimes and he abused that privilege as much as the teacher would let him. The girl who had designs on him never had a chance to catch his eye like she had hoped, and the bullies that had designs on him also had to leave him alone. He was too popular and had too many eyes on him to get at him like they wanted. They only had to bide their time, though. It wasn't until Arnold's senior year in high school that someone mentioned using computers to make all of their classwork easier. They were in a public school and there was absolutely no budget for a computer lab, so the students were told that they would have to wait until university to gain access to the best public-used computers and their software. Arnold wasn't interested in it at all anyway, until the day in biology class when one of the girls near him mentioned using computers to model the dissections to save everyone from having to touch the specimens. He caught his breath at the thought of using something that could save all of his work, especially since he was never allowed to keep the specimens he acquired on his own. His father wouldn't allow them in the house. The teacher couldn't mock a student openly in class, so all he said was that it wouldn't be the same as actually having the specimen. Arnold raised a hand and the teacher was surprised, because he almost never volunteered to speak when he didn't have to. Yes, Arnold. I think using computers to catalog and model the specimens you either can't keep or can't acquire on your own would make it a useful tool, sir. Arnold said while looking at the girl. Arnold wasn't trying to argue either point and he hadn't invalidated either the girl's opinion or the teacher's. It was the perfect middle ground for both arguments. The teacher had to agree that in that respect it would be useful and went back to teaching the class. The girl on the other hand, was quite happy that she had finally gained the handsome buzz-cut blonde boy's attention. Do you have a computer that can do that? Arnold whispered to her, unable to control his enthusiasm. I have one of the best. The girl easily lied. Maybe if you. I'd like to see it. Arnold said, his eyes almost shimmering with anticipation. The girl's heart skipped a beat at his intense stare and it took her a moment to recover. Do you want to come over to my place after school? I do. Arnold said and smiled. I can't wait to see what computers can do. The girl caught her breath at the smile Arnold beamed at her, because it had transformed his stoic and statue-like face into one that looked like an angel. She was struck dumb for the rest of the class because he kept staring at her with that smile and she could only stare back. When the bell rang 20 minutes later and everyone stood up to leave, it shook her out of her stupor and she managed to stop staring at Arnold, then she left the room before she embarrassed herself further. Arnold hadn't noticed that she was embarrassed, mainly because he was going over in his mind what specimens he would want to hunt down and look at first, now that he was given a chance to look for them on his own. He was sure that the girl had been exaggerating about being able to model everything, but that was only because he hadn't had any experience at all with computers. His interests had been solely on biological exploration and he had completely ignored everything else. Now that he knew computers could help him with that, he was all for it. The rest of the day passed quickly and when school was over, he found the girl at her locker. I can't believe he actually agreed to go to your house. The friend said. I know. The girl said. He hasn't said a word to me in 3 years. She chuckled. I was starting to think that I didn't exist in his world. You exist. Arnold said from behind them and both girls were startled and let out little squeals as they dropped their things. He bent down and picked up the 2 dropped books and the girl's sweater. Arnold. The girl said and took the sweater from him and her friend took the books from him. My mother has to keep reminding me that I can't ignore important things, just because I'm passionate about something. Arnold said frankly, and the girl's face flushed red as she blushed. Would you mind if I came along, Heather? Her friend asked. Heather turned to her and gave her an angry face that she thought was out of Arnold's sight. That would be fine. She said without gnashing her teeth like she wanted to. Her friend was startled for a moment at the anger, then she smiled. Arnold won't mind. She leaned around Heather and looked at him. Would you? Heather sighed and turned to look at him and was surprised to see his face had lost the smile. Can you help me find specimens to look at or to model? Arnold asked pointedly. If you can't, then there's no reason for you to come. Both Heather and her friend were surprised to hear this, for different reasons. Heather was surprised because she thought she would be stuck with trying to take care of 2 guests at her house, and the friend was surprised because she was being so blatantly rejected. The friend tried to come up with a convincing argument for her to come along. Like as company or something. She thought. I was in the library and the woman there showed me her computer. There's not a lot of room in front of it. Arnold said. If Heather and I are there, where will you fit in? The friend couldn't offer to find specimens, because she didn't know where to look, and she also couldn't say that she would sit on the bed or a nearby chair without offering some explanation of why she would need to be close by. She couldn't realistically do both, so her arguments died before she made them. You and I can visit together tomorrow. Heather said happily to her friend. We can even study. Her friend couldn't argue that she wanted to come along to protect Heather from him, not while right in front of the boy in question, so she sighed and leaned back against the lockers. She would have to settle for following them and watching them from afar. Heather gathered her homework things and put them into her backpack, then handed it to Arnold. Hold this for me, please. Arnold took the backpack and slung it over his shoulder. Heather pulled on the sweater after making sure it hadn't gotten dirty from being on the floor, then she shut her locker. See you tomorrow. She said to her friend and took Arnold's arm and walked away down the hall. Arnold followed the forceful girl out of the school and over to the parking lot. He wasn't sure what was going on, until a car pulled up and its horn honked at them. Heather waved at the driver and opened the back door and climbed in. Arnold climbed in and sat down as well, then the car was off and out of the parking lot. Who's your friend? The middle-aged woman asked as she peered into the rear-view mirror. This is Arnold. Heather said and blushed as the woman's eyes widened in surprise. The famous Arnold I've been hearing so much about. The woman asked, teasingly. Arnold turned his head from looking out the window to look at the woman's reflection in the rear-view mirror and not at the back of her head like most people do. His stoic expression caught her attention for a second, then she put her attention back onto the road. She's my mother. Heather whispered to him. It's nice to finally meet you. The woman said. Arnold nodded, because he wasn't sure what to say in response. No one had said that to him before. From what my daughter said, I expected you to be 10 feet tall and have glowing white wings. The woman joked. Is it possible for people to be that tall? Arnold asked. I know humans having wings isn't possible, mainly because we don't have the bone structure or the musculature to support wings large enough to pick up our weight. If compared to birds, human wings would have to be about 8 to 10 feet long each, giving us a wingspan of 20 to 22 feet. Heather and her mother fell quiet at his words. Heather because she had never heard him say more than a sentence before, and her mother because he was very articulate and explained things well. Our feathers would have to be huge, probably about the size of an ostrich feather, and multilayered like an eagle. Without enough feathers, we wouldn't be able to maintain flight or even take off. Arnold said. That's just speculation on my part, though. Neither of them responded, so Arnold turned his head and looked out the window again to try and see where they were going. Maybe she didn't pick a blockhead this time like she usually does. The woman driving the car thought. They arrived at the 2-story house and the woman parked in the driveway. She was out of the car and at the front door to unlock it in only moments, then she came back to the car to meet Arnold as he stepped out. Would you be a dear and give me a hand carrying in the groceries? The woman asked Arnold. Mom, he's already carrying both of our backpacks. Heather said. So he is. The woman smiled and opened the trunk. It should only take a couple of trips. Heather sighed and was about to take the backpacks from Arnold when he reached into the trunk and weaved his hands through the handles of 6 of the bags, with 3 on each arm from his elbow to the wrist, then lifted. He walked over to the house and opened the door with his still free hands and went inside. Arnold looked at the basic layout of the house and took a guess on where the kitchen was, based on his own house. He walked down the hallway and was rewarded with a large open-concept kitchen and living room. He put the bags on the counter in the same fashion he had picked them up and went back outside. Heather and her mother stood there beside the car and watched as Arnold repeated the motion and picked up the last 4 bags from the trunk and carried them into the house. They didn't move at all as they took in the scene that had just happened. The woman had expected him to take a token bag or 2, just to claim that he had helped like she asked, and she would have to take in the majority of the rest with several trips back and forth. Heather, on the other hand, had seen that Arnold hadn't struggled at all, even with the large bags of canned goods that her mother always managed to buy when she went shopping. "We need to get inside," the woman said as she closed the trunk. Heather nodded and they went inside. They were shocked to find Arnold as he sat at the kitchen counter with all of the items sorted into 2 groups, one to be stored at room temperature and one to refrigerate. Even the bags were nicely folded at the end of the counter. "Arnold," the woman said, and he turned to look at her. "What are you doing?" "I knew I should have put them away, too," Arnold said. "Mom would smack me for just sitting there and not helping her." Arnold stood up and went to the refrigerator and quickly took all of the things from one pile and put them into the refrigerator in the appropriate spots. When something had multiple options to fit, he took the closest one and adjusted the contents of the shelves to make everything fit. He closed the refrigerator door and looked at the dry goods. He took a few moments to look inside the closest cabinets and only saw pots, pans, and baking dishes. "Where do these go?" Arnold asked and motioned to the dry goods. The woman was too surprised to speak and pointed to the door beside the refrigerator. Arnold opened it and found an entire room made to hold dry goods. He knew his mother would like to have a whole room for the things she had to squeeze into the small shelves inside the kitchen cabinets. With a cursory glance, he had a basic layout in his head and then moved like a machine as he took everything from the counter and put it into the pantry. Arnold made sure that everything was within easy reach and in the order he thought they would be used. He had done this for his mother countless times, so he did it again almost automatically and was finished barely 5 minutes later. He shut the door and walked over to the kitchen counter and sat down to wait. His mother always had him move out of the way to inspect his work. Sure enough, both Heather and her mother went to the refrigerator and looked inside, then they went to the pantry to look at the work he did. To say they were stunned at the transformation to both the fridge and the pantry was an understatement. Heather always had trouble finding anything and her mother had tried several times, quite fruitlessly, to organize her pantry properly. Now it had been done in only a few minutes and they stared at the shelves of easily reachable items. "You need to invite him over more often," the woman whispered and Heather nodded. They came out of the pantry and Arnold still sat there with a passive look on his face, as if he didn't know what he had just done for them. The woman put a hand on her daughter's shoulder and led her around the counter to stand her next to the strong and handsome boy. "Why don't you two go on upstairs while I make you a snack?" Heather's mouth opened slightly at her mother's offer, since she had never offered it before. She always insisted on keeping an eye on her and any boy she brought home. Always. "It's getting close to supper time, though," the woman said and looked at Arnold. "Perhaps you would like to stay for supper instead?" Heather's mouth dropped open all the way and her mother let out a soft laugh at her daughter's shock. "Go on, now," the woman said and made a shooing motion with her hands. "I need room to work." Arnold completely understood that reasoning and nodded, which she took for acceptance to stay for dinner, then he walked out of the kitchen and went back down the hallway to stand at the bottom of the stairs. He didn't know what room was Heather's, so he had to wait for her directions. "He's even attentive and is waiting for you," the woman whispered to her daughter. "Don't mess this up." Mom." Heather couldn't understand the complete 180-degree turn that her mother's attitude had taken. "You've been talking about him all this time, so don't try to back out now." Her mother smiled. "Get a hold of him and don't let go." But he's going to be something important. I can feel it," the woman said, which echoed Heather's thoughts when she had met Arnold for the first time. "You're graduating this year and you're already 18. You need to start thinking about your future." I'm going to college." Heather said. Yes, and I'm sure he is, too. Her mother said with a smile. Wouldn't it be nice to get to him before he is exposed to all those other sluts in college? Heather completely missed the insult and nodded. Then get to work. Her mother said and turned her daughter around and eased her out of the kitchen. She smiled as Heather walked with confidence and met Arnold at the bottom of the stairs, then her daughter took his hand and led the boy up the stairs. That's it, Heather. Let him where you want him to go. She thought in satisfaction and went back to the counter to start making supper. Heather took Arnold to her bedroom and had him sit on her bed. Thanks for carrying my backpack, she said, and took it from his shoulder, tossed it onto the bed behind him, then she walked over to the little desk she had. She hit the button to turn on the computer and then turned on the flat-screen monitor. Arnold heard the whirring inside the rectangular metal case and the light blinked next to the button Heather had pushed. What's it doing? He asked and slipped off his backpack and laid it next to hers. Powering up, Heather said, then her face went a little red. Arnold, there's something I should tell you. Arnold looked away from the computer base and at her face. This was one of the best computers, about a year ago, Heather admitted. They released 2 new versions since then. Does that matter? Arnold asked, a little confused. Can you still look at specimens on it? Heather nodded. My VR headset doesn't lag when I play with it either. Your what? Arnold asked. My VR headset, Heather said and pointed to a weird-looking half-dome thing. It looks like half of a bike helmet. Arnold said. How do you use it? Despite what it looks like, you wear it like this, Heather said, and put the part Arnold thought would cover the back of the head over her face. It covered her ears and eyes and had straps to hold it in place. I haven't tried many games with it, even though there are a lot of them out there. Games? Like board games? Arnold asked a little excitedly. The surgery one was his favorite. Heather laughed softly and put the headset down. Adventure and MMOs, actually. Huh? Arnold gave her a perplexed look. Oh, Arnold, Heather said and walked over to him, then she touched the side of his face. I have so much to teach you about computers. Arnold gave her a smile and she smiled back. Heather stood there with her hand on his face and just stared at him. After a minute or so, Arnold spoke. I think the computer is on. Huh? Heather shook her head slightly at being distracted by how handsome Arnold was. Yes, the computer. She walked over to the desk and sat down, then changed her mind and stood. Arnold, you can sit here and I'll stand. Arnold stood and walked over to the desk and sat down and looked at the computer screen. The best part about computers is how easy they are to use, Heather said and leaned over beside him, making sure to press her breast into his shoulder. You click here and it shows you the programs that it has installed, she said and moved the mouse and clicked the spot. Arnold stared at the mouse and missed what she showed him. What's that? It's called a mouse. Heather said. I have no idea why. Arnold smiled at the device that had the same name as some of his specimens and wondered what little things it might have inside to play with. Look at the screen, Heather said, and Arnold did as she said. These are the programs that we can use, she said. This is a writing program, this is an internet browser, this is a virus scanner, this is a music player, this one lets you talk to people. Arnold listened attentively and tried to remember what all of the things did. A few he had no clue what they were and had to ask about them. The most important one he learned was the internet browser. With that, he could access things on the internet, which was a collection of things that people from all over the world put out there for everyone else to see and use. Heather's back was sore after 10 minutes and she stood up with a groan. I need to sit down. Arnold stood up and motioned to the chair and she shook her head. You need to stay there to use the computer, Heather said, moved his chair out slightly. I'll sit on the floor and show you how to look for things on the internet. Arnold sat back down and then Heather knelt on the floor in front of him. He didn't question this, especially when she opened the internet browser and what she called a search engine popped up. What kind of gas does the engine take? Arnold asked and she laughed. No, it's not a motor engine, it's... Heather stopped talking and clicked on the little box and typed in search engine definition. This is what it means. Arnold was surprised when a huge list of responses appeared and the top one was the actual definition. Now the fun part. Heather said. I don't have any specimens on my computer, but I know how to find them. She smiled and typed in biological specimen. Once again, Arnold was surprised when a bunch of different results appeared, the top one being the definition of what a biological specimen actually was, then information pages, and various links to other sites. He read the information on the screen for several moments and then he felt a finger on his lips. I know how much you like this subject. Heather said with a whisper, then removed her finger. If you do something for me, I'll show you as many specimens as you want. Arnold's eyes sparkled and he gave her his biggest smile yet. I'll do anything. Heather blinked her eyes several times and her lips became a little plumper as blood rushed to her face. I can't ask for that right away, even though he said he would do anything. Start small and work up to it. She thought. I want you to kiss me. Is that all? Arnold asked and leaned in and kissed her forehead, just like his mother did to him. Heather held in her laugh as she shook her head. Not like that. She said and pointed to her lips, then she put her arms around his neck and kissed him. She had kissed a few boys before, so she had lots of practice on how to do it. Arnold didn't react to it at all and just sat there. Heather broke the kiss and looked at him. What's wrong? Don't you like it? I don't know. Arnold said. I've never been kissed like that before. I was your first real kiss. Heather asked, slightly surprised. She had assumed he had a few girlfriends before coming to high school and hadn't gotten a new one because he was studying so much. A real kiss? Arnold asked and tilted his head slightly. A kiss on the forehead isn't real. It doesn't really count as a kiss. Heather said and saw his face close down. It's still a kiss. She said to counter what she just said. It just means more when you kiss them on the lips. Oh. Arnold said. Now that you know the difference, do you want to try again? Heather asked and didn't wait for him to answer and kissed him again. She did similar motions with her lips as she did before, then she added a little tongue. Almost as if he read her thoughts, he duplicated the same motions and kissed her back. Heather had to break the kiss about 10 seconds later because she was breathing a little heavier than normal. He learned that really fast. She thought in surprise and tried to calm down. It took her a few more moments to even her breathing out and saw that Arnold was looking at her. Arnold, I like you. Heather said. I really like you. She continued when he didn't react. Not just friends like, I mean like as in boyfriend and girlfriend like. You want to be my girlfriend? Arnold asked. Yes. Heather yelled, then she laughed awkwardly. Ah. I mean, yes, I'll be your girlfriend. Okay. Arnold said. Can you show me the specimens now? Heather nodded and successfully hid how happy she was. Watch carefully. She said. After searching for what you want, you get the links to go to the different sites. If you want to actually see what you are searching for. She clicked something near the top of the results and watched his face. Arnold took in a sharp breath when the entire screen was filled with pictures upon pictures of specimens. Some were dissected, some floated in jars, some were suspended like the biology teacher's spider except that they weren't as detailed. Heather liked that she had made him happy with such a simple thing. She showed him how to scroll with the rolling button on the mouse and he saw that there were hundreds of specimens. That's only the first page. she said and clicked the link to go to the next page of the results. Arnold gasped as hundreds more specimens appeared. He looked from the screen to Heather's face, then back at the screen. You can click on the images to make them bigger, and you can even save them. Heather explained how to do that and Arnold tried it. When you save them on your computer, you can look at them whenever you want. She opened the folder where the picture he saved was and double-clicked it. A photo viewer loaded and the image filled the screen. Whoa! Arnold said at the details that he could see. You're gonna love this. Heather said with a smile and clicked on the option to zoom in and out, then made the image twice as big. Arnold's mouth dropped open at the sight. All of those little things inside a specimen were now the size of his hand. I think that deserves another kiss, don't you, T? Heather's words were cut off as Arnold gripped the back of her head and kissed her. She closed her eyes and enjoyed the feeling of his lips on hers. He didn't stop after a few moments like she thought he would, and he kept going for several minutes. Heather broke the kiss and sat back onto her heels as she stared at him. She couldn't take much more kissing like that and not have it lead to other things. She knew she couldn't push him too much, because she might scare him away by how much she wanted him. Her face was flushed completely red and her breathing wasn't going to slow down anytime soon. If I took his first kiss, then, that means. Heather's thoughts went where she knew they couldn't go yet. Supper. Her mother yelled from downstairs and it startled Heather, who stood up and went to the bedroom door. Okay. Heather yelled back. We'll be right down. She turned back to look at Arnold. We need to go eat. What about the computer? Arnold asked. Heather walked over and clicked something and the screen went blank and the whirring stopped. She saw Arnold's worried face, so she leaned down to give him a quick kiss. It's just asleep. Heather said and hit a key on the keyboard and the whirring started again. The screen came on and showed the same thing it had a moment before. She saw him relax and then smile at her, so she gave him another kiss and put the computer back into sleep mode. She pointed to his backpack and he slung it over his shoulder, then she took his hand and led him out of the room and downstairs to the dining room. There was a large table that could seat 8 people and her mother stood at the far end of the table with a tray and 3 plates on it. Hey, you two. Heather's mother said and motioned to the chairs on either side of where she stood. Heather stopped herself from sighing and walked around the table and sat on her mother's left. Arnold copied her and walked around the table and sat on her mother's right after hanging his backpack on his chair. She gave them each a plate of food and then served herself and sat down. She started to eat without saying a word and Heather gave her an inquisitive look, shrugged, then started to eat too. Arnold started to eat as well and they ate the entire meal in silence. Heather had been worried that her mother would have talked the whole time and she was relieved when she didn't make a peep until the meal was over. That was delicious, wasn't it? Heather's mother asked. She didn't wait for a response and took the plates and silverware from Arnold and her daughter and put it on the silver tray. She left the room with it and came back with tiny bowls of ice cream with chocolate sauce and cherries on top. Once again, she didn't say anything and the 3 of them ate the dessert. Heather was a little freaked out at the silence, mainly because her mother never stayed quiet during a meal. Her mother took the empty bowls and left again, then came back and looked at Arnold and Heather as if she was deeply sorry for something. It's getting late, don't you think? She asked and then looked at Arnold. It's about time I drive you home. What about the computer? Arnold asked as he stood and grabbed his backpack. I'll mark the page we were on and we can do this again in a couple of days. Heather said and stood, then walked around the table to take his hand. I've got Kelly coming over tomorrow to study. I'm sure that Kelly can wait while. Her mother started to say. Mom. Heather cut her off before she asked Arnold over. My boyfriend doesn't want to intrude when I'm studying with Kelly. Her mother caught the hint immediately and smiled. Well, then. She said and looked at Arnold, we will just have to wait to have you over again. The 3 of them left the house and went to the car. Her mother got in and started it up, and Heather stepped close to Arnold. "I'll see you in school tomorrow," Heather said. "Okay," Arnold said, and started to turn away. Heather held on to his hand and he stopped and turned back. "You're supposed to kiss me goodbye." Arnold nodded and gave her a kiss, exactly like she had shown him, and they stayed like that for several moments. The car horn beeped at them and Heather jumped from the scare, which broke the kiss. Heather sighed at the interruption. "I guess we should only kiss for a few seconds to say goodbye," she said, then she leaned in close. "And when we see each other in the morning." "Okay," Arnold said, and climbed into the back passenger seat, the same seat he rode to the house in. Heather's mother smiled at the interaction between them, backed out of the driveway, then drove Arnold home. Heather's mother stopped her car in front of Arnold's house and put the car in park. She turned her body slightly and looked out the passenger side window to look at it and liked what she saw. It was a nice house, well maintained, and the lawn was manicured. She saw Arnold reach for the door handle. "Goodbye, Arnold," she said. Arnold changed directions and his hand grabbed the back of the seat in front of him to pull himself forward. Before Heather's mother could react, he snaked his hand behind her head and kissed her like he had been taught to when saying goodbye. He even included a little tongue. 1, 2, 3. Arnold counted in his head and broke the kiss. "Goodbye." Heather's mother had a shocked look on her face. "Arnold." "What? You shouldn't kiss me like that." "Why?" Arnold asked. "Was I bad at it?" "No, not really," she said. "It was actually pretty good, to be honest." She thought and didn't say it, in case it encouraged him. "Not that he needs me to encourage him. I must need more practice, then." Arnold guessed from her response. "I only just learned what a proper kiss was today." Heather's mother blinked her eyes for a moment. "He just learned it today?" she asked herself, surprised. "Arnold, I'm Heather's mother," she said to try and clue him in on what he just did. "I know you are," Arnold said. "What does that have to do with it?" "Okay, maybe he is a blockhead. He's not understanding it at all," Heather's mother thought. "Look, Arnold," she said, and he gave her a blank stare, which meant that she wasn't going to be successful in trying to explain things to him. You. She decided to wait and would try to explain it again later. "Just don't kiss me in front of Heather." "Okay," Arnold said and sat back, then opened the car door and stepped out. Heather's mother watched him walk up his driveway. "That boy," she thought, and touched her lips. "If he's that good after only a day." She let the thought trail off and laughed as she drove away. Arnold stepped into his house and went to the kitchen. "I'm home, Arnold," his mother yelled, and then he was taken into a tight embrace. "Where have you been?" she exclaimed. "We've been worried sick about you." "I went to Heather's house to check out her computer," Arnold said, and he noticed that his father didn't come out of the living room to see him. "You wouldn't believe the things it can do. Arnold, you shouldn't be wandering around town this late at night," his mother said, and let him out of her death grip. "You should have called if you were going to be late getting home. We could have come and picked you up. I didn't even know I was going until lunchtime, then we went right to her place after school," Arnold said. "Her mother drove us there and drove me home. I didn't wander anywhere," his mother sighed. She always had a hard time trying to instill proper behavior into him. "Next time, you are to call me as soon as you know you're going somewhere that's not school. All right?" "Okay," Arnold said. "Did they feed you at least?" his mother asked, and he nodded. "I'm glad," she said, and relaxed. "If you're done scaring me for tonight, go on up to your room and do your homework." Arnold nodded and went up the stairs. He wasn't sure why his mother acted that way, though. He only went to Heather's and came right home. He hadn't thought to call though, so he had to assume that was the reason. He would make sure that he would call home from now on. Arnold quickly did his homework and went to bed. The next morning he got a shower and dressed in the next outfit in his closet. Every week he would spend several hours arranging his clothing for the next school week, so he wouldn't have to worry about it each day. His mother always inspected him to make sure he wasn't going to offend anyone with his clothing choices, and today wasn't any different, except that she had an apologetic face. "Arnold, I'm sorry for how I acted last night," his mother said and checked him over. "It's my fault. I didn't know that I should have called. I do now and I will from now on," Arnold said. "You're a good boy, Arnold," his mother said and hugged him. "Now eat and get ready for the bus." Arnold ate breakfast like he normally did, without really tasting it, then he grabbed his backpack. His mother walked him to the front door. "Are you going out after school today?" his mother asked. "No. Heather's friend Kelly is coming over," Arnold said with his hand on the doorknob. "I'll be home on the bus after school. If that changes, let me know," his mother said. Arnold nodded and opened the door, then walked out to the street. Ever since he was little, the bus always picked him up across the street from his house. No matter what school it was or how many times the bus driver changed, it always stopped for him in the same spot. He heard the bus approaching from down the street and looked at the front door of his house. "Goodbye," his mother said and waved. Arnold heard the keyword for kiss and quickly calculated how much time he had, then he ran across the street and up the driveway. "Arnold!" his mother exclaimed. "What?" Arnold put a hand behind her head and kissed her like Heather had taught him. 1, 2, 3. He counted in his head and broke the kiss. "Goodbye," he said, then ran down the driveway and across the street just in time. The bus arrived and the door opened and he stepped inside. "Arnold! Get back here!" his mother yelled, but he didn't hear her as the bus pulled away with a loud roar of its engine. "Where the hell did that come from?" she asked of no one in particular as she rubbed her lips. Arnold was oblivious to his mother's questions as he rode the bus in the same seat he always sat in. The bus picked up other high school students and quickly filled up, then drove them to school. Arnold always waited for everyone else to get off the bus before he moved, then he left the bus as well. For the first time ever, he didn't go right into the school when the bus left. He turned around and quickly scanned the parking lot for Heather's mother's car and saw the black vehicle. Arnold walked towards the parking lot and he saw the rear door open. Heather stepped out with a backpack in her hand and she wore a nice oversized shirt and skirt combo that was both tight and loose at the same time. It definitely caught the eyes of a lot of the boys that were around. A few of them commented about it and one guy made a rude and suggestive comment. Heather frowned and glared at the boy. "You shouldn't say stuff like that, Brad." Arnold knew he needed to do something, so he changed the direction he was walking and headed right towards Brad. "Ha!" Brad said. "What are you gonna do? Hit me for telling the truth?" He laughed. "Don't act like you haven't done it." In the next moment, Brad felt something smash into the side of his head and fell to the ground. "Fight!" the guy next to Brad said. "Fight! Fight! Fight!" The chant was taken up immediately and Brad looked up to see what idiot had dared to punch him. His eyes widened when he saw that it was the stoic and usually reserved Arnold. "Arnold, no!" Heather said as she ran over to him and took his arm. "He's not worth getting suspended over." "Good morning," Arnold said and kissed her for 3 seconds like she told him to do yesterday. The fight chant got louder as Brad stood up. He was a couple of inches taller than Arnold and he saw that Arnold wasn't intimidated by that. "Don't puss out," someone said. "Heather doesn't want me to fight," Arnold said. His slight excitement started to wane. "She got him whipped already." Another guy said. She works fast. Well. Brad said with a smile. She does suck a good dash. Asterisk slap. Heather's hand stung from hitting him so hard. I told you not to say things like that. Brad made a fist and started to swing, then he was suddenly on the ground and tasted pavement. Arnold had hooked a foot around his and pushed, which used his own punch's momentum to drop him to the ground. Nearly everyone winced as Arnold used his foot and stomped on the back of Brad's head and his nose broke with a loud snap. Arg! Brad yelled and tried to roll over to grab his nose, then Arnold kicked him in the crotch and he didn't know which pain to grab first. He received 2 more kicks to his gut and a hard stomp to his groin. The pain was so intense that he couldn't see straight through his tears. No one stepped forward to try and interfere because they were too shocked by the turn of events. My girlfriend said not to say those things. Arnold said without inflection. You should listen to her. I'll get you. Brad managed to say through his gurgling breath as the blood flowed from his nose and down his throat. Arnold leaned over slightly and looked down at Brad's bleeding face with cold dispassion. I wonder how many times I can stomp your face into the pavement before you pass out. Hey. Someone said. Hey, man. Don't do it. Arnold turned the same cold eyes to him and the guy held his hands up. He asked for the fight, so we won't report it. The guy said. You won, so leave it at that. Arnold looked at Heather and she nodded several times. Okay. He said and walked towards the school and took Heather with him. Arnold, where did you learn to fight like that? Heather asked. Squirrels. Arnold said and she stared at him in surprise. They are brutal when they fight. Heather looked back at the parking lot and saw the guys pick up Brad. His face and shirt were covered in blood. Yes, they are. She thought as the guys loaded Brad into a car and drive off. Her eyes drifted over to her mother's car and to her shock, her mother looked like she was laughing and gave her a thumbs-up gesture. The pair entered the school as if nothing happened and Arnold led Heather to her locker and her friend was waiting for them. So, how was the date last night? Kelly asked with a smile. It was great. Heather said, more than ready to change the subject from what just happened. Do tell. Kelly said. Let's see if you lie about it. Unbeknownst to them, Kelly had been watching them from nearby. She hadn't been able to see into the upstairs bedroom, but she had a nice view of their dinner and the kiss when Arnold had left. Arnold, this is girl talk. Heather said to him. We'll meet you in class. Arnold nodded and left to go to class. He already had everything he needed in his backpack and didn't have to go to his locker. He always made sure that he had the next day's things and it saved him so much time between classes that he could always be the last person to leave one classroom and still be one of the first people to enter the next one. Arnold sat down and waited for nearly 10 minutes before the bell rang for the students to go to their first class. Almost 5 minutes later, Heather and Kelly came into the room and then the second bell rang. Kelly sat down in the seat behind Arnold and Heather walked to hers that was beside his, then she bent down and gave him a quick kiss. He looked at her with a question on his face and she smiled. I'm just making sure everyone sees that we're together. Heather said and sat down. Wouldn't it be easier to just say that you're my girlfriend? Arnold asked. She's marking her territory. Kelly said with a grin from behind him. I wouldn't get to kiss you if all I did was say it. Heather said, her face slightly red. All right, settle down. The teacher said and rapped her ruler on her desk. We covered the Napoleonic Wars last week and finished them yesterday. She said and looked at their partially bored faces. What did we learn from them? Don't piss off short people. Someone said loudly and most of the class laughed. Actually, I think that's a good observation. The teacher said to their surprise. Shocking, I know. She smiled. Now, open your books to page. The class passed quickly, as did the next and the next. When lunch started, Heather didn't rush out like everyone else did. Kelly was halfway to the door before she realized Heather wasn't beside her. She stepped aside and let the other students pass by, then went back to her seat. "Come and eat lunch with us," Heather said to Arnold. "I'm supposed to go to the lab and catalog the specimens for the teacher." Heather finished for him. "They are already catalogued or he wouldn't have them." "It's practice," Arnold said. "If I can name all the parts for." Heather sighed. "How long will it take?" "I only have 300 more to memorize," Arnold said. "Based on my performance so far, it should only take another 2 weeks. 2 weeks where I can't eat lunch with my boyfriend," Heather said, sadly. "You can always come in there with me." "Blah," Heather said and stuck out her tongue, then she laughed. "My stomach's not as strong as yours. There's no way I could eat with all of those things floating around in their jars," she said and stood up. "I'll just have make do with kissing you goodbye before lunch." Arnold understood the hint and stood as well, then he kissed her like she wanted. Kelly stood there with an open mouth as they kissed each other like she wasn't there, then she was surprised when the kiss ended barely 3 seconds later. "Let's go, Kelly. Arnold needs to get to work," Heather said and left the room. Kelly looked at Arnold for a moment, then followed her friend. Arnold waited for another minute, so that the hallway would be relatively clear of traffic and went to the lab. Like Heather had stated, he had work to do. "He's going to regret doing this to me," Brad said when he waddled out of the emergency room with an ice bag held to his crotch. Half of his face was bandaged as well and his hair was stuck up in the back. "I think you should leave him alone," his friend said as they walked to his car. "Brad," Eric said and put a hand on his arm. "You saw his eyes, didn't you?" Brad huffed. "The smug bastard can't talk down to me like I'm nothing." "That's just it," Eric said as he remembered the ice-cold eyes that had looked at him. "I'm sure that's what he thinks." "He won't be thinking that for long," Brad said and carefully climbed into the back seat of the car. "As soon as the swelling goes down." Eric sighed. "Brad, are you even listening? He'll kill you if you go after him." "I don't think so," Brad said and waited until Eric sat in the driver's seat before speaking again. "I've never lost a fight in my life." "You just lost one," Eric said and started the car. "He sucker punched me." "Actually, he only used his feet, except when he pushed you." Eric pulled out of the parking lot. "The point was that he jumped me," Brad said. "Soon, we'll see how much he likes it." Eric shook his head and drove his friend home. It was going to take about 3 weeks for Brad's broken nose and the bruises on his abdomen and crotch to heal completely. He got all of that in only a few seconds and Arnold wasn't even trying. Eric thought. "If I hadn't stepped in when I did." He looked at his friend in the rear-view mirror and shook his head. "I better stay as close as I can to keep Brad safe from his own ego." Arnold finished lunch in the lab and met Heather at their next class. The rest of the day passed by and then it was time to go home. Arnold stopped at his locker and changed everything out for the next day and to do his homework that night, then he met Heather and Kelly at their lockers and walked with them out to the parking lot. The group of guys were there and gave Arnold some unfriendly looks, and he completely ignored them like he usually did and walked the 2 girls to Heather's mother's car. "Goodbye," Heather said and Arnold took the cue and kissed her. "You're getting better at it." Arnold let a small smile out and she climbed into the back seat. Kelly was tempted to say something, then changed her mind and climbed into the car and shut the door. "Goodbye, Arnold," Heather's mother said as she leaned towards the passenger side to test him. If he failed, Heather would be upset about it, but it had to be done if he couldn't follow a simple direction. Arnold remembered the woman's words and only nodded, so she gave him a huge smile and waved. "See you tomorrow," she said, and the car drove off. You hurt our friend. A voice said from behind him. Arnold turned to look, and the group of guys were a few feet away from him. He didn't respond because it was a statement and not a question. Several people that were standing around moved back, so they wouldn't be involved and would also stay close by to see what happened. You must think you're so tough. The guy said, and reached out to poke Arnold's shoulder. Quick as a flash, Arnold grabbed the wrist and held on as he jumped a foot into the air and kicked out with both feet. His heels dug into the guy's stomach and knocked the wind out of him. It was a move that Arnold had seen squirrels do a bunch of times when fighting over the nuts he was trying to entice them with. He learned a lot from those squirrels. Both of them dropped to the ground on their backs, and Arnold rolled over onto his belly and hopped up into a crouch, then jumped onto the guy and sat on his chest as he rained punches down onto his face. Since the guy still hadn't caught his breath yet, Arnold's weight stopped him from expanding his lungs, and he had no energy to try and defend himself. Once again, the people around were too stunned by what was happening to help. Hey! Hey! A woman's voice yelled from across the parking lot, and the boys heard running footsteps. What are you doing? Oh, shit! It's the vice principal. One of them said. Go! Go! They didn't even glance down to look at their friend and abandoned him as they took off, as did the partially gathered crowd. Arnold! Stop! The vice principal yelled, and Arnold stopped immediately. What did you do? I defended myself. Arnold said, and looked down at the bloodied and mangled face of the boy. Why were you fighting? She asked. Brad made a comment about my girlfriend this morning and she slapped him. When he tried to punch her, I pushed him down and stomped and kicked him to stop him. Arnold said calmly. These guys kept yelling, fight, until I won and they stopped. So, it was retaliation against them for goading you? The vice principal asked. What's goading mean? Arnold asked. They tease and bully you to force you to react. Then no. I ignore stuff like that all the time. Arnold said, to her surprise. When he tried to grab me, I grabbed him instead and kicked him, then punched him in the face until you said to stop. The vice principal looked at the bloody young man on the pavement. She knelt and checked that he was breathing and had a pulse, then she took out her cell phone and called 911. They sent out an ambulance right away. You're going to have to stay here while I get all of this sorted out. She said. Can you call my mother? Arnold asked. She said to call if I wasn't coming home right after school. The vice principal gave him an odd look for a second, then nodded and asked for his phone number. When his mother stopped yelling, she agreed to come to the school to be there with him. After about 20 minutes, the ambulance and a police car arrived in the parking lot. The EMTs ran over to check on the severely beaten young man, and the single police officer talked to the vice principal. Besides a lot of surface damage, nothing was broken or life-threatening. One of the EMTs glared at Arnold for doing it, then saw his blood-covered hands. I hope you're satisfied. I broke one of my fingers and didn't break anything on him. Arnold said. So, no. I'm not satisfied. One of your fingers is broken. The other EMT asked, because the first was too stunned to speak. Arnold held up his fists and opened them to only have 7 fingers and 2 thumbs move. The ring finger on his right hand stayed bent. I'll check it when we're done here. The EMT said and went back to work. A car sped into the school's parking lot, slammed on its brakes, and came to a stop about 50 feet away. Arnold's mother got out of the driver's side and ran over to him. I want you to tell me exactly what happened. His mother exclaimed, and the police officer paused in talking to listen. Arnold told her everything that happened and didn't leave anything out. I want to talk to this Brad character. The police officer said. He wasn't in school today. The vice principal said. Eric took him to the hospital because his nose was broken. A guy's voice came from the returned crowd. It looks like he's going to have company. He's going to be fine. One of the EMTs said as they put the unconscious young man onto a stretcher. He's just passed out from repeated blows to the head. He's still on school property. Arnold's mother said loudly. This is a school matter. He committed a crime. The police officer started to say. No one called the police or reported a crime. The vice principal said, and he turned to look at her in surprise. I asked for an ambulance and you just showed up with it. The police officer wasn't sure what to say to that. This is a school matter and we will take care of it. The vice principal said. Are you sure? The police officer asked and rattled the cuffs. It might teach him a lesson about committing crimes in the future. I don't think giving him a criminal record that he will have for the rest of his life is a good lesson for him to have for being involved in a schoolyard fight. Arnold's mother said in a severe voice. The police officer actually winced from the venom he heard in her voice. Let me see your hands. The EMT said to Arnold and he held them out. The man rinsed his hands with distilled water and then inspected the ring finger. You're lucky, I think. It's just dislocated. Arnold's mother gasped, because she knew what that meant. Give him something for the pain. The longer it's out of joint, the more it's going to hurt. The EMT said and looked at Arnold. I'm going to pull it straight and it's going to hurt. A lot. Arnold nodded and the EMT didn't even count as he grabbed the middle of the finger and yanked on it. A sickening pop was heard by all those around. Arg! Arnold yelled in pain for a moment, then it died down. It's going to be sore for a while. The EMT said and put a light wrap around it. I suggest making an appointment with a doctor to get it checked out properly. Arnold's mother nodded and the EMT went to the ambulance and climbed in, then it drove away. Miss, are you sure? The police officer tried to plead for the case to take Arnold. We have dealt with fights before. The vice principal said and dismissed the man. The police officer gave a last look to Arnold and got in his car and drove away. The vice principal sighed. God, what a headache I have. She said and looked at Arnold and his mother. Until I can corroborate Arnold's story with Brad, I have no choice but to suspend Arnold. What? Arnold's mother looked at the vice principal like she had lost her reasoning. Arnold was the victim and you're suspending him? He doesn't look like a victim. Someone from the crowd shouted. Who said that? The vice principal turned to the crowd and no one moved or spoke. I can't believe this is happening. Arnold's mother said. I'm sorry. The vice principal said. He's here and he claimed responsibility for fighting. He did no such thing. He admitted to it, so I have to take that as an admission of guilt. The vice principal said. If you suspend him, you are going to ruin his academic record. Arnold's mother said. He's going to lose the bursary prize for perfect attendance as well. Arnold's mother scowled at her. I don't have a choice here. He's suspended. For how long? 2 weeks, effective immediately. What? It's a 1-week suspension for each fight. The vice principal said. I'm taking it easy on him, too. Arnold's mother clamped her mouth shut and didn't say what she wanted to say. I need to get the rest of my books. Arnold said. I'll escort you back inside. The vice principal said and all eyes were on them as they went back into the school. Arnold loaded up his backpack and cleared out his locker completely. Arnold, I'm not kicking you out of school. You're just being suspended. Is there a difference? Arnold asked. I won't be allowed back until you say I can come back. The vice principal sighed and didn't respond, so he shut his locker and she escorted him out of the school and back over to his mother. The Parent-Teacher Association is going to hear about this. Arnold's mother said. I suggest not doing that. The vice principal warned. If they learn that he's not getting the full punishment, they may insist that he does. Arnold's mother was surprised by this. But he. To be honest, no one cares about his academic record when violence is involved. The vice principal said and looked at Arnold. Except me. She said. It's still going to be a mark on your record, but it's not going to be as bad as it could have been. Why? Arnold asked. It could invalidate university scholarship applications and even future job prospects if you're perceived as a nuisance. I don't care about that. Arnold said. Why are you helping me? You're a good kid. The vice principal said. You never caused problems and you kept to yourself, until now. She reached out and put a gentle hand on his shoulder. Go home and think about what happened. When you come back in 2 weeks, I want you to write a paper about your experience. You suspended him and you're still giving him homework? Someone in the crowd asked. Whoever said that is going to get the same thing. The vice principal said loudly as she turned to the crowd and let Arnold's shoulder go. Arnold. His mother said and motioned to the car parked 50 feet away with the driver's side door still open. Arnold walked towards it and put his backpack into the back seat and climbed into the passenger side. His mother got in and shut her door, then reversed and turned the car around and drove out of the parking lot. Arnold, I'm not angry at you for this. His mother said through clenched teeth. Arnold looked at her with a blank face and she glanced at him briefly to see his reaction. I believed everything you said and I know you didn't lie. His mother continued as she drove. There's only one thing about it that I want to question you about. Arnold didn't respond and she didn't expect him to, since she hadn't asked him a question. Why didn't you tell me that you have a girlfriend? She asked calmly, even though in her head she wanted to berate him for getting into the situation he was in. It's her fault it happened. She thought. Heather said she wanted to be my girlfriend yesterday. Arnold said, without the normal excitement and enthusiasm that having a girlfriend would usually instill in a normal teenager. I said okay. Arnold. His mother said with a sigh. Do you know what having a girlfriend means? No, but she's teaching me. Arnold said and his mother caught her breath. What is she teaching my son? His mother asked herself, full of worry. Then her thoughts went right to that morning and Arnold risking his life to run across a busy street to kiss her and say goodbye. What do I say? What can I say? Can I tell him to not have a girlfriend? Can I warn him how dangerous it is to have a girl teaching him God knows what? His mother asked herself many questions along those lines as they drove home in silence. Arnold's mother pulled the car into their driveway, then touched Arnold's arm to stop him before he could move to leave. Arnold, we need to discuss something before going inside. She paused for a moment and then spoke. Heather taught you how to kiss, didn't she? Yes. Arnold said. Arnold, you can't kiss me like that. His mother said. Why? Arnold asked, confused. Heather said that a kiss on the forehead was still a kiss, but it didn't mean as much as kissing on the lips. He said, then his face went from blank to completely indifferent. Does that mean you don't care about me as much as she does? What? His mother exclaimed and then she sighed. She saw the trap she was now in and she didn't have any real way to get out of it. Arnold, you're my son. You mean more to me than anything else in this world. Then what's wrong? Did I do it badly? Arnold asked. His mother sighed again. She couldn't respond to that and not cause him some distress. Arnold, I know I need to practice more. Arnold said. I'll get better. I promise. His mother blinked her eyes at him for a moment, then she made a decision that might cause him distress. Don't tell your father that you kissed me. Arnold understood, because Heather's mother said almost the same thing, which reminded him of what else she said. I won't kiss you in front of him either. His mother was a little surprised that he would make that logic leap so quickly and she didn't have to tell him. She nodded and the two of them went inside the house. His father wouldn't be home from work for several hours, so neither of them had to worry about telling him about what happened to Arnold until then. They had barely entered the house when the phone rang. His mother picked it up. "Hello?" She paused. "Yes, he's here." Another pause. "I'm not sure if I should let you." A brief pause. "I'm sure that you're sorry," she said, and then she sighed. "All right, but I expect you to bring his homework over every night." Arnold heard a loud yes as his mother held the phone out from her ear, then his mother passed him the phone. He spent the next hour telling Heather everything and listening to her reactions, then he listened to what she had heard from others about what had happened and her reactions to that. Arnold's mother stood there and listened the entire time, and she wasn't sure if what she was witnessing was a good thing or not. She was happy that he was finally showing some kind of interaction with the people around him, but she wasn't sure she liked what that interaction was. On one hand, for the first time in his life, Arnold was talking to a girl. On the other hand, he had defended her honor and gotten into trouble. His mother held in her sigh at that thought. She knew it made him a good boyfriend to step up when it was necessary, and she also knew it was the start of a lot of headaches for her, especially since Arnold was now suspended for 2 weeks and his girlfriend was going to be visiting every day. She was excited when I asked her to deliver his homework, and it's supposed to be a punishment. His mother thought and kept looking and listening to Arnold. "I wonder how much longer." "Okay," Arnold said and hung up. "She needs to study with Kelly now." His mother stepped close and took him into a hug. "You would have stayed on the phone with her all night if she wanted to keep talking, wouldn't you?" Arnold nodded. "I don't have school tomorrow, so I don't have to do my homework right away." She smiled and let him out of the hug. "You can go and do it now." Arnold nodded again and went up the stairs. He had worn his stuffed backpack the entire time and didn't take it off until he sat down at his desk. He quickly did the homework he had received that day, and then he thought about the homework that the vice principal had assigned. He could do it now, but she told him to wait until after he had been suspended for the 2 weeks before he was allowed to write it. He packed up his backpack again and put it aside. "Finished already?" his mother asked, and he turned to look at her. She had combed her blonde hair and had changed into her relaxing clothes. She wore a loose pair of faded jeans, her favorite pair, and a baggy white t-shirt. She also carried a plate of food for him. "It was easy," Arnold said. Compared to memorizing the anatomy of hundreds of different animals and insects and their real and scientific names, doing every other subject was like relaxing. His mother walked into the room and put the plate on his desk. "Arnold, I've been thinking about something," she said, and sat down on his bed while he ate. "I want to tell you what to expect, that is, what might happen, now that you have a girlfriend." Arnold paused for a moment in eating. "Are you going to show me what?" His mother's face flushed red. "No, no." She shook her head. "I'm just going to tell you." Arnold shrugged and kept eating. Damn it, I don't know how to start," his mother said, and then took a deep breath and let it out when she decided what to say first. "I guess it's time we had a special talk." Arnold paused in eating again. "A special talk?" he asked. No one had ever mentioned there was such a thing to him before. His mother saw that she had his undivided attention and took another breath and let it out. "You need to know about the birds and the bees." Arnold smiled. "I know all about them." "What?" His mother was shocked. "He only just learned to kiss yesterday. Bees are necessary for cross-pollination of plants and crops. The hive queen controls them all with pheromones and—" His mother relaxed when he described real bees. "No, Arnold. The saying, 'birds and the bees' is a phrase most people use when they are going to talk about sex." Arnold raised his eyebrows at her and dropped his fork onto his plate. "Yes, this is definitely going to be an awkward talk," his mother said, and pat the bed beside her. Arnold took the cue, since she used it a lot to get him to sit where she wanted him to. All right. She turned to face him and he did the same. She took his hand and looked into his eyes. Please, bear with me while I try to explain things. Arnold nodded and listened intently, then his mother started to speak. He memorized everything she said, her facial expressions as she described certain things, and the motions and fidgets her body did when she talked about more intimate things. When she was done, she was exhausted mentally and Arnold stared at her with surprise on his face. "Mom," Arnold managed to say when he realized what she had told him. Is it true?" His mother sighed. "Yes, Arnold. People have sex for fun and not just to procreate. But..." Arnold went over everything he had learned about the animal kingdom. "I can see your mind working," his mother said. "You won't find any animal species that does the same thing, except for dolphins." Arnold blinked his eyes and looked at her. "Dolphins? They have sex because it's fun, too." Arnold's entire worldview started to shift. Despite all of the evidence he had gathered over the years, he started to realize that humans were not like he had always thought. He looked down at the hand his mother still held tightly, then he looked back at her face when he came to a conclusion. "We're not animals," Arnold said. His mother let a smile show on her face. "I wouldn't quite say that," she said. "Some people would argue that we're some of the worst animals on the planet." Arnold opened his mouth to say humans weren't the worst, then his eyes went to his bare desk. "Mom," he said and looked back at her as he had a thought. "What do I have to do to get a computer?" His mother knew this was going to come up as soon as he had mentioned that Heather had one and showed him what it could do. "Arnold, we kept that information from you for a reason." "What do you mean?" Arnold asked. "If you knew what computers could give you access to. Heather already showed me the thousands of specimens it has." His mother held in her sigh and didn't want to tell him everything. "You can look for other things on the internet besides specimens," she said, and hoped that he got the hint and didn't ask about what, specifically, he could search for that she didn't want her impressionable 18-year-old son looking for. Not right after the talk they just had about the birds and the bees. "Heather said that, and that there are games to play, too," Arnold said. He didn't notice that his mother had relaxed. "We still need to talk about what else, Heather. Tell me what I have to do to get a computer," Arnold said and cut her off. His mother sighed. "Computers are expensive, Arnold." Arnold nodded. "I know they don't have them at school and they do have them at college," he said. "I don't want to wait for a year before getting access." He stopped talking and smiled. "How much is in my college fund?" His mother was a little surprised he had made the connection so quickly to his college fund. "We'll have to talk to your father about it." Arnold nodded and looked at the clock. His father would be home any minute. "You should wait until he's had supper before bringing it up," his mother said. Arnold went to his desk and finished his supper, then the two of them went downstairs and waited until his father ate and went to the living room. Arnold followed him, with his mother beside him, then pleaded his case for a computer and using some of his college fund to get it, since it would be essential for him to have a computer for college. "I'll get you one of the old ones from work," his father said. "Gerald," Arnold's mother said with squinted eyes. "It's a legitimate expense for college." Gerald ignored her. "Old ones work just fine if all he's doing is doing homework and printing things." "Gerald," Arnold's mother said in a stern voice, and he sighed. "We can't afford it, Annie," Gerald said and turned to look at her. "Excuse me?" Annie said. "There's over $5,000 left." Gerald finished the sentence and Annie's face drained of color. He stood up and looked apologetic. "I made a few bad investments and I had to take some of it." "Some of it?" Annie yelled and slapped him. "We had over $28,000 in that account," she said. We've scrimped and saved everything for years to get enough for Arnold to go to college. I'll get it back. Gerald said and rubbed his face. There's this hot commodity that's going to be available soon and if you touch that money again, I'll divorce you and sue you for everything. Annie nearly screeched. You've ruined all of our plans. Years of hard work. You made me quit my job and stay at home to raise our family, then you steal our son's money. Arnold stood there and listened to his mother as she berated and cursed at his father. It was the first time he had seen any kind of disruption in his home life and he wasn't sure what to do about it. Gerald had had enough after about 10 minutes of her yelling. I'll fix it, Annie. Calm down. He said and reached for her. In the next moment, he was slammed against the wall, bounced off, and had landed on the floor on his back. He looked up and couldn't stop his shiver at the cold expression on his son's face. Arnold. Annie took his arm to restrain him, because she remembered what he had said about the fight at school. He was going to hurt you. Arnold said, his voice empty of emotion. Arnold. Annie started to say that her husband wouldn't do that. I saw his face. Arnold said. He never looked at you like that before. Annie looked at her husband and saw the fear there. Gerald. I swear I wasn't going to hit you. Gerald said in a normal voice. His anger at her yelling at him for the stock market's fault was forgotten. I just wanted you to be quiet and to listen to me. Annie wasn't sure what to make of that admission, especially since she didn't want to hear what he had to say and wondered what he would have done to make her listen. The three of them stayed there in silence. Annie stood awkwardly and considered what to do next. Gerald sat up on the floor and wondered what he could say to make it up to his wife. Arnold looked at his father and remembered what his mother had said about people acting like animals, which made him wonder what kind of specimen treatment his father would be best suited to undergo. Arnold, I think you need to go upstairs and... Annie started to say. No. Arnold said, which surprised her, because it was the first time he had told her no. You are going to argue and I will have to come back down and stop it again. Both Annie and Gerald looked at him with wide eyes. I'm staying right here. Arnold said and didn't take his eyes off of his father. Gerald took Arnold's cold gaze for another 10 seconds and stood. I need some air. Annie didn't say anything as her husband left the room. A moment later, they heard the front door slam. His mother let out a shaky breath and hugged Arnold. Mom, can you stop him from taking any more money? Arnold asked. The account is in all three of our names, so no. Annie said, sadly. Can we take it out instead? Arnold asked and she looked at him in surprise. Is the bank open now? No, it's closed until tomorrow. We'll go and get it then. Arnold said, a plan already forming in his head. Go upstairs and go to bed. Annie said. Arnold nodded and went upstairs like she wanted and went to bed. He didn't sleep, though. He was waiting for the sound of his father's car. He knew that if he could estimate the right time to move, then he could confront his father before the man had a chance to hurt his mother. Arnold didn't wonder where his protective instinct came from and he didn't question it. It had appeared mysteriously when Heather had been threatened and he thought that was the end of it, since feelings like that usually waned fairly fast. This one didn't and had stayed with him. He hadn't felt a need like it before, and he knew he would do anything to keep that feeling. When he thought his mother was threatened, he felt it surge forward, much stronger this time, and he had acted without thought for the consequences. When that feeling filled him, Arnold knew that he would do anything to protect his mother. Absolutely anything. Gerald drove home a few hours later, after getting several drinks at a bar. He had paced himself and wasn't actually drunk, according to his intoxicated brain, and he only swerved a little on the road. He pulled into the driveway and parked beside his wife's car. He sighed at the extra expense that having two cars was, but, since he didn't want her to think about the money, he hadn't complained about exactly how tight their budget was. Gerald had lied about the money left in his son's college account. There was only about $3,000 left, not the $5,000 he had claimed. He felt bad about her finding out before he could put the money back, and that feeling was compounded by his drinking. He stepped out of the car and stumbled, then leaned against the car and eased the door shut. It was late, so he tried to be quiet because he didn't want to wake anyone up. After waiting for a few minutes to make sure he wasn't going to trip and fall, he carefully pushed off from the car and walked slowly towards the house. As he reached for the door handle, the world spun and swirled, then he was on his back in the grass beside his car's right front tire. He fought to not throw up from the quick movements, then he felt a weight on his chest and looked up to see the most terrifying sight he had ever seen. Arnold stood there with his foot on his father's chest and held the shovel to his father's neck. "Don't ever hurt my mother," he warned in a deadly voice. "If you do, I want you to remember one thing." He pressed down on the shovel just enough to choke a little and not enough to cut the skin. "There's always room for one more specimen in the backyard." Gerald's alcohol-addled mind sobered up slightly as it reeled from the threat and his hands tried to push the shovel away from his neck. He couldn't believe this was real and thought he was hallucinating, until his hands gripped the shovel's sides and it didn't move an inch. "I've been digging up the yard with this shovel ever since I was 6 and you showed me how to hide my work," Arnold said and let a smile show on his face. Even though it was technically the same smile he showed other people, his father instinctively knew that if he wasn't careful, it would be the very last thing he would ever see. "I can see you understand," Arnold said and moved the shovel from his father's throat and leaned over him. "I want to make sure you remember," he said, and before his father could react, he covered his mouth with a hand and swung the shovel and whacked him right between the legs. Gerald let out a smothered yell and he sobered up almost completely as the pain shot up through him. It made his eyes tear up and he curled up into a ball on his side. Arnold's hand moved away from his mouth and when Gerald turned his tear-streaked face to see where he went, he didn't see him. He relaxed as much as he could, considering the pain between his legs, and he stayed there in the grass beside his car. It took almost an hour before Gerald gathered up the courage to try and move after receiving such an injury. It was painful, much more painful than anything he had ever felt before, and he rolled from his side onto his back and then sat up. "I think he might have broken it," Gerald thought and sat there for another 15 minutes before he tried to stand up. He was grateful for the numbing effect that consuming so much alcohol had on him, because he thought if he had to feel everything, he might not have stayed conscious. He cursed silently and had to take waddle-like steps to get to the front door of the house. He opened it with his key and stepped inside. It took another 10 minutes to get to the kitchen and make up a bag of ice, then another 20 to waddle up the stairs to go to his bedroom. Annie was in bed and had her back to him, as Gerald had expected, and he had planned on talking to her before going to sleep. His thoughts immediately went to Arnold and his threat and he broke out in a nervous sweat. "Tomorrow. I'll do it tomorrow," Gerald thought as he very carefully laid down without aggravating his injury and held the bag of ice to his crotch. After work. Arnold laid in bed and he had a smile on his face. He had done it. He protected his mother and no one but him and his father knew that he did, so he knew that he wouldn't get in trouble with no witnesses. If his father did say anything, Arnold knew his mother wouldn't believe him, not drunk like his father was. His father was smart, so he would listen to the warning and not hurt her. He better. Arnold thought and the smile disappeared as his mind started to wonder just how different it was inside of a person than it was inside an animal. He drifted off to sleep while imagining his father after he didn't take the warning, and he was fine with that. Arnold got up the next day and dressed, then went downstairs to discover that his father had gone to work already. His mother gave him an apologetic smile and a hug, then served him breakfast. After that, his mother changed out of her nightgown and robe and into more appropriate clothing, then they went to the bank to withdraw most of the remaining money. When they sat down in the office of one of the bank representatives, they were informed exactly how much was actually left in the account. $2,900.36. Arnold had watched his mother's face and he knew beyond a doubt that the reduced total had hurt her to hear. He reached out and took her hand, and she turned her head to look at her son. The son she had failed to protect from the frivolities of her husband. Annie was surprised when she saw Arnold's happy smile, and she fought back her tears because she thought that he didn't understand what not having a lot of money meant. "It's okay, Mom," Arnold said. "We'll get through this together." "Arnold." Annie took a breath and let it out. "We should open another account and put the money in it," Arnold said. "No," Annie said. "There's no point if we're going to spend it." "We're going to spend it?" Arnold asked, confused. "I thought you wanted to save it." "I do. I did, when there was enough in the account that the interest made it grow every year. With only a couple thousand, it's a waste of the bank's time and ours." Arnold sat there and thought about it. "What about your other money?" "My other money?" Annie asked. "This was my college account, right? Don't you have one for normal things?" Annie caught her breath and looked at the bank rep. "I need to know the state of my other account." "Of course," the man said and brought up the information and printed off a sheet, then handed it over. Annie's face drained of all its color as she read what was on that sheet. "Oh, God!" she whispered. Before she could stop him, Arnold plucked the sheet from her hand and looked it over. He wasn't knowledgeable about a lot of things, but he did know what the words "current debt including loans" meant. "Why did you let him do this?" Arnold asked. "Arnold, I didn't." Annie started to say. "I didn't ask you, Mom," Arnold said in a cold voice and looked at the bank representative. He had a significant amount of money as collateral, not counting the inherent value of the house he owns. With those things, getting approval for a second mortgage was easy. The man said. "A second mortgage?" Annie asked, quite surprised. "We don't have a first mortgage. You've had a mortgage for nearly 10 years and made steady payments. I can print off a detailed list for you too. We are withdrawing the money from my college account." Arnold cut him off. "There's no need to. We're taking everything but $10, so you won't have the paperwork for closing the account." Annie said. "I'll need to get the manager's approval for that large of a withdrawal." "Did you need the manager's approval when my father stole the other $25,000 from me?" Arnold asked the man, who looked shocked. "You knew it was my college fund and you let him take it without even telling us, even though our names are on the account." He held up the paper and the note clearly said what it was for. "Get me the rest of my money. Right now." The bank rep nodded and left the room to do just that. "Arnold, I'm so sorry," Annie said and gave his hand a squeeze. "It's not your fault," Arnold said. "We both know whose fault this is." Annie sighed and nodded. She had never imagined that something like this could happen to her. She was now so deep in debt that she had no idea how she was going to buy groceries this week, let alone make the minimum payments on the mortgages and the loans. She couldn't fight back the tears anymore and let them pool up and drip from her eyes. She didn't know what to do now. "It's okay, Mom," Arnold said, and she looked at his face. It wasn't blank like it was a moment before. He had the makings of a good scowl and she took in a sharp breath at the sight. It was the first time he had made that face and she let his hand go, reached up and touched his brow briefly, then caressed his cheek. "Arnold," Annie said, because it broke her heart a little to have to see a scowl on her son's face. "I'll use Heather's computer for now," Arnold said, and the implications of that statement were not lost on his mother. "Arnold, I'm sure that we can get a nice computer." Arnold shook his head. "I don't even know what to look for," he said. "I'll talk to Heather and then search the internet before trying to buy anything." Annie wasn't surprised that he thought of that option, so she nodded. The bank rep came in with their money and it was a small stack of $100 bills. "Take that back and get 20s and 50s. Annie said, slightly angry at the ridiculous currency denomination. What would people say if an 18-year-old walked into a store and tried to buy something with $100 bill? The bank rep opened his mouth and saw Arnold scowl, then he sighed and left again. God, how stupid can he be? Annie said and shook her head. They would probably call the police on you for trying to spend fake money. Arnold was surprised to hear this. Why? Most normal people rarely see a $100 bill, let alone want to accept it and then try to give you change for it. Annie said. If they didn't call the police, they would laugh and tell you to come back with money they can use. So, even though it's money, some forms of it aren't accepted. Arnold said, and his mother nodded. They sat in silence and the man came back with 30 of the $50 bills, 69 in $20 bills, and a $10 bill for a total of $2,890. He counted them out after sitting down and handed it over. Is that satisfactory? The bank rep asked. No. Arnold said and shoved the money in his pocket, then plucked the man's business card from the desk. We're going to tell everyone what happened at this bank and how you helped rob an 18-year-old of his future. Arnold. Annie exclaimed when the bank rep's face showed shock. Let's go, Mother. Arnold said and stood up, took his mother's hand, then led her from the room and out of the bank. Gerald sat at his desk on an extra thick cushion, with a bag of ice between his legs. He was doing paperwork in his office, like he did every day, when his telephone rang. He hadn't been expecting a call this morning and answered it immediately. Thank you for calling Charles and Associates. How can I help you today? The fake smile he always used when answering the phone faded as he listened to a bank representative tell him everything that just happened at the bank. I really need a drink. Gerald thought and looked at the paperwork on his desk. He sighed and got back to work. He planned on having an extra long and probably completely liquid lunch. Arnold and his mother arrived home and went inside. Annie tossed her keys onto the kitchen counter and took a deep breath and let it out. She looked at her hands and they trembled. Not only had her husband ruined their plans for Arnold, he had ruined their future as well. They had 2 mortgages, a massive loan to pay back, 2 cars to pay for that she thought had been bought outright, no more collateral to borrow against, and no money coming in except what her husband made. Everything is falling apart. Annie thought and the tears started again. She felt a pair of surprisingly strong arms hug her from behind. Arnold. Tell me what I need to do to help. Arnold said. Annie sighed. You're only 18. You can't take on a burden like this. Mom. Arnold said in a stern voice, and she startled slightly. His arms eased their hold and she turned around to look at him. He was exactly her height and he looked right into her eyes. I will do anything to protect you. Arnold, you don't have to. I want to. Arnold said with conviction. Annie caught herself before she gasped. He's never admitted that he wanted anything before. She thought, shocked. What else can I do to help? Arnold asked and let her go, then reached into his pocket and took out the money to give to her. How do I get more of this? You. Arnold, you're too inexperienced to get a job. I'll start looking tomorrow. Arnold said as if she hadn't just said he couldn't. Annie knew he wasn't going to be convinced not to, so she only nodded and accepted the money. I'm going out to get some groceries. She said and took 4 of the $50 bills and put the rest into a can on top of the refrigerator. I'll be back in a couple of hours. Arnold nodded, because he knew that when she went shopping for food, it was an all-afternoon affair. His mother gave him a quick hug and left the house as if she was in a hurry. He waited until her car had driven away before he grabbed several $20 bills, his coat, and left the house. He estimated that he only had 3 hours to get to where he needed to go and be back before his mother knew he had been out of the house, unsupervised. Arnold hadn't been out of the house on his own before. He had always been driven somewhere and had company of some kind. He didn't know why that was and he never questioned it. He still didn't. He wasn't nervous about being alone and walking around, either. He didn't consider why it was that he was always accompanied when going outside, not even when he went to the bus stop and several people gave him odd looks. He had no real experience reading people's faces, especially people he didn't know, so he ignored everyone around him. He was lucky that this time the people observing him weren't bothered about being ignored. He stepped onto the bus when it arrived and politely asked how to get to a specific address. The bus driver was a little perturbed with the question and about how Arnold was holding up the people behind him from getting onto the bus and asked him to step aside. Arnold did so and the others climbed on and paid the fare and sat down. You need to take the 51 line on the next street and then get off at Central Street. The bus driver said. Wait for 20 minutes and take the 18 line until you get to the plaza. The place you want is near there. Thank you. Arnold said and pulled out a $20 bill. He knew you needed to pay to ride the bus, but he didn't know how much it was and was about to ask when the bus driver laughed at him. The man pointed to the sign below the coin return. You need exact change or you won't get a ride. Oh. Sorry. Arnold said and stepped off. The bus driver gave him a little wave. Good luck, kid. He said and shut the door, then the bus pulled away. Arnold still didn't know how much a bus ride was, but he did confirm that his mother was right. Even when you had money, people won't take it if it's not the right kind. He let a small smile out and walked down the street, turned the corner and walked down the block, then took another corner to see where the next bus stop was. He didn't see it, so he walked around for several minutes and found a store. Arnold went inside and waited in line to get to the counter, then pulled out a $20 bill. I need change for the bus. Change isn't free. The woman said a little crossly. You need to buy something first. Arnold looked at the things around him and grabbed the first thing he saw. The woman gave him an odd look at the purchase, made change, and gave it to him. Happy that he now had the right kind of money to ride the bus, he gave her a smile. The woman reacted when his blank face became lively and smiled back. The bus stop is about 10 minutes down the street that way. She said and pointed. Thank you. Arnold said and left to go find the bus stop. Like the lady had said, he found it about 10 minutes later and people were there waiting. The bus pulled up and he waited for everyone else to get on and counted the change needed and put it in the slot. A piece of paper popped out and he looked at it. Haven't you seen a transfer slip before? The bus driver asked with a chuckle. This is my first ride on the bus. Arnold responded. Ha! The bus driver said. Well, for the next half an hour, you can use that to hop on any bus and even the subway. There's a subway? Arnold asked with wide eyes and the bus driver burst out laughing. Hurry up, and sit. The bus driver said between laughs. We need to go. Arnold nodded and sat in the very front seat. Can you tell me when we get to Central Street? I need to take the 18 line to the plaza. The bus pulled away from the curb and the driver pointed up above the windshield to an electronic sign that Arnold hadn't seen. The stops appear there when we approach them. Arnold watched as the sign flicked from Franklin Street and showed Alexander Street instead. The bus pulled over and came to a stop a moment later. One person got on and they showed a transfer slip, and the bus driver nodded and drove away. It took a little while for the sign to change and show Central Street. When it did, Arnold prepared to get up and leave. The bus driver saw him and chuckled at the eagerness. Here you go. He said and pulled over. Have fun. Arnold nodded and waited for 6 passengers to get on before he left the bus. He walked over to the bench and sat down to wait the 20 minutes for the next bus. He was going to ask the old man sitting on the ground in the corner of the bus stop how to tell what number the bus had, then the bus in question showed up with a big 18 painted on the front. The bus stopped and Arnold showed the transfer paper and sat down. The bus pulled away and he watched the electronic sign until it said Plaza. No one got on and nearly everyone got off with him. Now that he was there, he wasn't sure where to go. You look confused. A nice older lady said from about 10 feet away. She was about 50 years old and it showed on her haggard face and frumpy clothes. I need to get to an address and I don't know where to go. Arnold said. Perhaps I can help. She said and Arnold told her the address, then she described exactly how to get there from the plaza and how long it would take. Thank you. Arnold said and started to walk away. Goodbye, young man. The nice lady said. Arnold heard the cue and turned back to her, then to her utter shock, he put a hand behind her head and kissed her like Heather had taught him. 1, 2, 3. He counted in his head and broke the kiss. Goodbye. He said and walked away. He needed to hurry if he was going to do what needed to be done and get home in time. The nice old lady had dropped her bag and stared at the handsome young man as he walked away. Thanks for waiting, Ethel. Her friend said as she came over. What a pain in the butt that stupid elevator is. She looked at her silent friend and saw the shock on her face. Ethel? Are you okay? Ethel moved her lips to speak and raised a shaking hand to point in the direction Arnold had gone. KKK kissed. She managed to get out. He kissed me. Her friend turned to look where she pointed and didn't see anyone. Who did what? Ethel didn't say anything else when she realized her friend didn't believe her. She looked at her hand and realized she had let go of her bag. She bent down and was glad that it hadn't tipped over and spilled. I think that's the last time I go and get a bottle of water and leave you alone in the plaza. Her friend said with a laugh and took her arm. We have enough time before lunch to get in line at that food truck that serves the best hamburgers in the city. Ethel shook off some of her shock and looked at her friend. It's a fast food truck. We shouldn't have to stand in line. Her friend laughed, because if they didn't get there before lunch, they would have to stand in line and wait 20 minutes to get a hamburger. They arrived and there were only 2 people in front of them. Her friend discussed the menu and Ethel's thoughts were not on food. All she could think about was that handsome young man and how he had kissed her. Finally, Gerald said as lunch arrived and he grabbed his suit coat and entered a late meeting lunch into his business calendar and left the office. He waved and said hello to several people, then entered the elevator and went to the ground floor. He was relieved when he stepped out into the fresh air and quickly walked over to his car. He climbed in and drove out of the parking lot to head to his favorite daytime drinking hole. It was a good 10-minute drive away from work, that way Gerald had enough time to sober up before going back after his long lunch break. Or so he thought. Everyone knew he went out to drink and he always came back a little drunk. He did his work without being affected by it, so no one called him out on it. He never drank at work, so he wasn't technically breaking company policy. Gerald arrived at the bar and spent an hour knocking back several drinks to try and forget about his anxiety over his wife discovering what he had been doing with their finances. He successfully drowned out the little voice in the back of his head that was telling him to smarten up and to apologize. With that important task completed, he stood up and stumbled out of the bar. Both the bartender and the bouncer shook their heads as their regular customer left the establishment quite a bit drunker than he had entered it. They didn't try to stop him from leaving, even though it was their responsibility. Gerald went to his car and got in on the passenger side and reached for the steering wheel, then laughed when he realized he was on the wrong side of the car. He got out and loudly slammed the passenger door, to a few witness surprise, then they saw him stumble around the car and climb into the driver's side. A concerned citizen came over to the car and looked at him through the driver's side window. Hey, buddy. The man said. You're too drunk to drive. The man frowned and couldn't argue about it. Mind your own business. Gerald said and checked his cell phone and set an alarm, then closed his eyes as he reclined his seat to take a nap. The man sighed and walked away. Gerald chuckled at the man's idiocy. I would never drive while drunk. He thought and fell asleep. 20 minutes later the alarm went off and Gerald cursed in his sleep. It took him a few minutes to wake up and turn off the alarm, then he grumbled about needing to get back to work. He hit the release on his seat to sit up straight and the seat flung him forward with such force that he slammed the bridge of his nose into the top of the steering wheel and it knocked him out. Arnold pulled the seat back into position with his rubber glove-covered hands and Gerald slumped down in the seat. He eased his unconscious father to the side and slid into the front as low as possible, then took his father's place in the driver's seat. He had watched both his mother and father do this hundreds of times and copied their movements. He turned the key and started the car, grabbed the stick on the steering wheel and tried to put it into the R spot. It wouldn't move and Arnold had to think about what he was missing. He looked down and saw the pedals on the floor and pushed the farthest one. The engine revved up and he quickly moved his foot off of it. He pushed the other one and felt the resistance, then held it and tried to move the stick again. It slid from the P to the R and the car lurched slightly. Arnold let a small smile out and slowly took his foot off the brake and the car rolled backward slowly. He didn't touch the gas at all and let the car drift on its own. When it was out far enough, he hit the brake again and moved the stick down to D. The car didn't move, so he gripped the steering wheel and touched the gas. The car moved slowly and he kept the smile and turned the wheel to get it to the pavement. Once he had the car on the road, he gave it a little more gas and the car swerved. He tried to turn it to straighten it out and overcorrected and the car lurched the other way. He stomped on the brake and took a breath, then tried again. He got the car going and held the steering wheel stiffly and managed to stay on the road and drove away. The concerned man that had seen Gerald was drunk, picked up his cell phone and called 911 to report a very drunk driver was endangering a lot of people with his erratic driving. If Arnold had heard the man's description, he would have been happy, because his inexperienced driving looked like the car was being operated by his drunk father. He drove for quite a ways, until he came to a spot that looked good. He was sure there were much better spots, but he didn't have a lot of time to do what he wanted, so he settled for doing something quick. He pulled off the road and put the stick into P, then opened the driver's side door. When Arnold had surprised his father by pushing on the seat and knocked him out, it had given him an idea. He put his unconscious father into the driver's seat and went to the trunk. He opened it to see a pile of junk and didn't bother moving it aside and took out the spare tire. The junk filled in the empty space and he closed the trunk and put the tire in the back seat right behind the driver's side. He climbed in and put his feet on the tire and pushed. It was surprisingly simple to break the seat tilt lock, then the seat and his father flew forward. There was a small crunch sound as his father's face bounced off the top of the steering wheel like it had before to knock him out, then the seat back and tire were heavy enough to press into the man's neck to make a sickening crunch sound. Arnold got out of the car and shut the back door, then he looked into the driver's side door and his father was gurgling blood out onto the steering wheel. He bent down to put his father's foot on the gas just enough to get the engine going and reached up to put the car back into gear. "I warned you not to hurt my mother," Arnold said, pulled the gear shift, then shut the door as the car lurched forward and drove towards the side of the road. He had lined it up as best as he could with his limited skills, and with his father jammed against the steering wheel, it held it steady as the car disappeared over the side and rolled down the embankment. The car sped up and Arnold didn't stay around to see what actually happened when it reached the bottom of the ravine. Arnold started to jog back down the road, until he reached a pay phone. He was tempted to call Heather and see if she would come and pick him up, then realized that he didn't want her near there, especially when someone found his father and she would know he was nearby at the time of the accident. He picked up the phone and hit the number the phone said was for information. "I need a taxi," Arnold said when the operator picked up. The operator had received several calls from that location, because it was so close to a popular bar, and she didn't think anything of it and gave him the number. Arnold called and the taxi arrived a few minutes later. It had been waiting by the bar for just such a call and sped over to his second fare of the day. Popular bars were the best sources of income for him, and they were usually locals and didn't have to go far. This fare was the same, and he only drove the young man back to the plaza. Arnold paid the fare without questioning it, because he didn't know that it was a bit more than it should have been, and he walked across the plaza and hopped on the bus. He showed his transfer ticket and the bus driver shook his head. "Sorry, kid. You're an hour too late." The bus driver said. "You need to buy another ticket." "Okay." Arnold said and put the money in the machine, and it gave him another stub. "What do I do with the old one?" "Crumple it up and toss it in the garbage," the driver said and pointed to a can behind the driver's seat. Arnold did so and sat down on the front seat and rode the bus back to the stop near the store, walked all the way back to where he could get the first bus, then rode that for free with the transfer paper until it stopped a couple of streets from his house. He crumpled the paper up and tossed it into the trash can behind the driver, which seemed to be why it was there, and stepped off the bus and walked back over to his home. Arnold saw that the driveway was empty and he hurried his pace. He had blown his time estimate by nearly half an hour, and he knew that he was on borrowed time. His mother could come home at any moment and he needed to be in the house when she did. If he wasn't, then he would have some difficult explanations to deliver. Arnold went into the house and took off his coat and kicked off his sneakers, then thought about getting a drink of water and went to the kitchen. He was halfway through the glass of water when he heard his mother's car pull into the driveway. He put down the glass and went over to the front door of the house and opened it, then put on his shoes in full view of his mother. "I was about to holler to you," Annie said as she got out of the car. Arnold came out of the house and went right over to the car's trunk. His mother popped it open and he did the 3 bags per arm trick and carried them into the house. She brought in 2 bags herself and they were a little too heavy for her, so she didn't try to carry any more. She put them on the counter and Arnold was already back with the next load. "Some of it has to go in the freezer before anything else," Annie told him, and he nodded. Then he was gone and brought in 5 more bags. "Is there any in the back seat?" Arnold asked. "Only toilet tissue and paper towels," his mother responded. Arnold quickly emptied all of the bags and sorted it all. He found the frozen items and put them right into the freezer, then checked the refrigerator for items that were close to being empty or expired, then removed them and added all of the new things his mother had bought. The dry goods to be put in the cupboards took longer to put away, because there were so many. When everything was checked and put away, Arnold went out to get the toilet tissue and paper towels. It took 2 trips because they were so big and awkward to carry. He stashed them in the closet where they were supposed to go. "You've gotten really good at doing all of this," Annie complimented him on his work after checking the cupboards. "Thank you, Arnold." Arnold nodded and looked at the clock on the wall. Annie looked as well and saw that it was close to the time when the high school let the students out for the day. "You should probably get a shower before she comes over." Arnold nodded again and went upstairs to get a shower and cleaned up. He took out the used rubber gloves from a pocket and mixed them into the unused pile he had collected from working in the lab at school. It was the perfect place to hide them. He dressed in the next outfit in his closet and went downstairs for his mother to check him over. She stopped herself from sighing at his choice of clothing and instead took him back upstairs and helped him get dressed. "You're not getting dressed for school, so take that off," Annie said and started to pick through his clothes. "You're getting dressed for a girl." Arnold didn't understand what she meant and took off the clothes he had just put on, like she wanted. "Girls need to know you're making an effort for them," his mother said. Okay. I think these will still fit." She handed him a pair of dress pants. "Try them on." Arnold put them on and they fit his waist, but the ankles were about an inch too high. "Damn it, I knew I should have checked your other clothes, since you haven't worn them in a while," Annie said and knelt and ran her fingers along the hem of the pants. "There's no extra fabric," she said sadly and stood. "Where are the jeans I bought you last month?" Arnold pointed and she went to the set of drawers and opened the top one. I'll need to iron them to get the folds out, Annie said and flicked them with her hands to make them billow out. See? Folds. Arnold saw the creases from being folded up and nodded. His mother held them next to him and saw they had an extra inch on the bottom and smiled. They would last him for a year at least, even if he grew a little. Put on that nice blue shirt and I'll be right back. Annie pointed to the closet and left the room at a run. Change your socks to black ones, too, she yelled from across the hall. Arnold listened to her advice and changed his socks, then he dug out the blue shirt and saw it had a crease on it where the arm had folded over in the closet, probably from sliding it between two other shirts when he hung it up. He walked out of his room and across the hallway to his mother's bedroom and stood there in just his underwear with the shirt in his hands. When she looked up at him, he pointed to the crease. Hand it over, Annie said, and he gave it to her. She flipped it around and hung it over her own shoulders, then she went back to work on his jeans. The trick is to use less moisture and to have a thick towel underneath to absorb the dampness, she said, and used the now hot iron to press his jeans and remove the folds. She used deft and quick movements to iron out one side, then lifted the jeans and flipped them over and did the other side. Arnold accepted the jeans when his mother handed them to him and he did the same flicking motion with his hands to make them billow out. She nodded when she saw all the creases were gone and he put them on. He liked that they were toasty warm and let a smile appear on his face. Now the shirt, Annie said, and whipped it off her shoulders and used the same deft motions and quickly ironed out the thin fabric. She gave it a flick and held it up to look at it, then handed it over when it was wrinkle-free and turned off the iron. Arnold put the shirt on and buttoned it up. He started to tuck it in and she stopped him. Leave the bottom of the shirt out, Annie said, and then unbuttoned the top button by his neck. She fixed the collar so it laid properly and stepped back. There we are. Casual chic. Arnold looked at her with a question on his face. She took his hand and they went into the bathroom to look in the large mirror. A nice shirt tucked in and buttoned up makes you look more professional, Annie said, and held the top button closed and lifted the bottom of the shirt to make it look like it was tucked in, then she let it go. Leaving it like this means you're relaxed at the moment and can be serious when it's necessary. So, I'm dressed up but not dressed up, Arnold said, and his mother smiled and nodded. It works a bit better with dress pants, but brand new dark jeans can work, too. Arnold looked in the mirror and memorized what to do and how he should look when asked to change. They both heard a car's engine approach and slow down to a stop. That's probably Heather, Annie said, and they left the bathroom and went downstairs to greet her. The doorbell rang just as they reached the bottom of the stairs and Arnold walked over and opened the door. Hi, Heather yelled nervously and stepped in to give Arnold an awkward hug, then she turned to his mother. I'm Heather. Annie clamped her mouth shut to stop from laughing. I think she's more worried about meeting me than I thought she was, she thought, then spoke. It's nice to meet you. Heather smiled and looked at Arnold and then back at his mother and didn't know what to do next. Annie saw her indecision and took pity on the poor girl. Is your drive staying for you? What? Oh. Heather went back outside and waved to the car. They're home. Thanks for waiting. Her mother waved back and then drove away. Heather went back into the house and Arnold shut the door behind her, then she looked at his mother nervously and then at him. Where can we do our homework? Heather asked. I'd let you go up into Arnold's room, but he only has a small desk. You'll have to settle for the large table in the dining room, Annie said, and waved in the right direction. She hadn't missed the quick change in Heather's facial expression from happiness to acceptance. Thank you, Heather said, and went where Arnold's mother said to go. Annie waved at Arnold and motioned for him to hurry up and follow. He nodded and went with Heather into the dining room. This table is almost as big as ours, Heather commented and took off her backpack and plopped it onto a chair. Where should we sit? Arnold was about to say in the chairs when he felt a hand on his shoulder. On the far end would be best, so you have room to spread out your books and still be close enough to show Arnold what he has to do. Annie said. Heather smiled and nodded, then moved her backpack down 2 chairs and started to unpack it onto the end of the table. Arnold, go and grab your backpack. Annie said. Arnold left to go upstairs to get it and his mother walked over to Heather. I need to tell you something important. Annie said. Heather stopped what she was doing and looked at her expectantly. You are Arnold's first girlfriend. Oh. Heather chuckled. I know. You do? Annie asked, a little surprised. He said I gave him his first real kiss. Heather said and let a happy smile appear on her face. He's so handsome that I assumed he had a few girlfriends before, until he said that. She remembered that first awkward kiss and chuckled again. He said he didn't know if he liked it and needed to practice. She realized what she said to Arnold's mother and blushed. We haven't, though. We've only kissed a couple of times, and only for a few seconds. Heather. Annie couldn't help but be amused at Heather's embarrassment, especially if all they did was kiss. Arnold is so sweet and listens to me whenever we talk. Heather said. He even stopped fighting when I asked him to, then Brad said. Annie touched the girl's hand to stop her. Arnold told me. Heather took a deep breath and let it out. I'm sorry that Kevin got him suspended because of that. That's the second boy's name? Annie asked and Heather nodded. The rat bastard waited until I left with Kelly before he started the fight. Heather said in a slightly angry tone. If I had been there. Annie's opinion of the girl raised up at her words. It was still technically her fault, since it revolved around her, but that was twice she would have stopped Arnold from fighting if she could. All right. Annie said and let Heather's hand go. I'll allow you to date him. Thank you. Heather said and let out an anxious breath. Don't thank me yet. Annie said. If you ever do anything to hurt him. Heather gasped. I would never. Arnold is, he's the best and I think I love him. She finished in her head, because she couldn't admit something like that to his mother before she even told Arnold. Plus, we haven't gotten past kissing yet. She thought and her blush returned. Annie knew then that Heather had a huge crush on her son and wasn't just using him. I'm glad. She said, then wondered where Arnold was and turned towards the hallway. Arnold. Where are you? I had to go back and get my pens and pencils. Arnold said loudly from the top of the stairs and came down them. I didn't put them in my backpack when I finished my homework yesterday. Arnold came into the dining room with 2 pens, 2 pencils, and 2 large erasers in his hand. He used them as an excuse, because he had stood at the top of the stairs and listened to them talk. I'll get supper started while you do your homework. Annie said and left them alone. Your mom seems really nice. Heather said and finished taking out all of the subjects they needed to do for homework, then she touched his hand. The biology teacher was pretty upset today. Arnold nodded. I missed assisting on the next class specimen and I'm going to be behind in my studies of his specimens. No, you aren't. Heather said with a smile. But I'm not there too. Look at these. Heather said and took out a stack of papers. Each one had a clear picture of the specimens and their part labels could be easily read. Heather. Arnold gasped at the huge pictures and took them reverently. I went into that lab, and the teacher let me take pictures of the ones you haven't studied yet. Heather said. Then I had Mom pick me up at lunch and went home to print them off for you. Arnold flipped through several of the pages and each one was clear and easily readable as the first one was. I'd normally ask for a kiss, but your mom is right in the next, Heather's lips became occupied as Arnold kissed her. He did it for almost a full minute and she had to break the kiss on her own to stop him. "Thank you," Arnold said and put the pages down. "I'll have them memorized by tomorrow night." "What?" Heather asked, surprised. "I thought you said it would take 2 weeks." "An hour at lunch for 2 weeks," Arnold reminded her. "All at once. Maybe about 10 hours. Then, that means. If I was in school, we could eat lunch together," Arnold said. Heather looked into his eyes to see if he was teasing her, and she knew he wasn't. "I'd like that. I don't see any homework getting done," Annie said from the doorway, and Heather jumped from being startled. "Sorry, Mrs. Strickland," Heather said. Annie smiled and walked back into the kitchen, and Arnold and Heather got to work. She showed him where they had reached in their school textbooks that day and then showed him the assigned homework. Unlike his usual homework ritual, Arnold had someone there with him and he didn't mind it as much as he thought he would. It was slower with 2 people, but he also had company, which made the time pass quickly. They worked through it together, and he even managed to help Heather when she got stuck on some of the math problems. "Are you almost done?" Annie asked from the kitchen. "We're on the last geography question, Mrs. Strickland," Heather said without looking up. "Arnold, what the heck does sedimentary mean?" "It's in the book, I think," Arnold said and flipped back several pages to read the chapter introduction. "It's particles of something that's left behind or deposited by either water or air," he said. "It usually refers to a type of rock that formed on the ocean floor, or on a previous ocean floor and the water moved on or evaporated." Wait. Heather looked at him. "Rock? Actual rock can form from water, or air?" "Really? The book says so," Arnold said. "It takes a while sometimes, too." Heather laughed. "Rocks form underwater," she exclaimed. "That's so freaky." Arnold saw her happy face at learning something new and he let a smile show on his face. "Now you know how I feel when I see a new specimen." Heather blinked her eyes a few times, then she glanced over his shoulder to look into the kitchen. She didn't see his mother, so she leaned forward and gave him a kiss for a few seconds. "Telling your girlfriend how you feel deserves a kiss," Heather whispered with a slight blush. They both wrote out the answer to the last question, closed the book, then packed up their things. Heather took Arnold's homework and put it with hers to pass it in. She knew the teachers would see they were similar and different, so she wasn't worried about either of them being accused of cheating or copying. "All done?" Annie asked and brought in 2 plates of food and set them on the table. "Mom." Arnold looked at where 2 other plates should be. "Does she know?" "I'll wait for your father to get home before I eat," Annie said and pat his shoulder, then went back into the kitchen. "It smells good," Heather said and tried some, then she started eating. Arnold joined her and they both ate supper while his mother waited for his father to come home. Only Arnold knew that she would be waiting for a long time. Or so he thought. They heard a car pull up and into the driveway. Annie gave her son and his girlfriend a quick glance, then went to the front door. She needed to warn Gerald about Arnold having a girl over, so she opened the door before her husband reached it, only to discover it wasn't her husband that stood there. "Ma'am," the police officer said and took off his hat, which only meant one thing. Annie didn't wait for him to say anything as she burst out into tears and started to cry.